All right, let's unpack this. Have you ever stopped to truly think about the incredible journey your eyes take every single day? From the font on your phone screen to that vibrant poster across the street. What if I told you that every one of those visual communications has a profound story, a history stretching back thousands of years?
It's remarkable, isn't it? How graphic design, a term only coined in, 1922, has been shaping human understanding and interaction long before it even had a name.
Exactly.
Today, we're diving deep into an incredible historical account, tracing the evolution of how we communicate visually, from ancient carvings all the way to digital pixels.
Our mission in this deep dive is to pull out the most important nuggets from this huge, rich history. We'll explore the surprising facts, those aha moments, and the pivotal inventions that totally transformed how information and ideas spread. Think of it as a shortcut to being truly well-informed about the visual world swirling around you. You'll understand not just what graphic design is, but why it matters so much, and how it keeps evolving in these fascinating ways. So to really get a handle on the visual world today, we have to go way back, before computers, but even before books as we know them. There was this revolutionary invention that truly set humanity on, well, an irreversible path.
Well, we connect this to the bigger picture, the invention of writing itself in Sumer, around 3100 BC. It brought about an intellectual revolution. It had a vast impact on social order, economic progress, and all future cultural developments.
Right.
Imagine, before this, knowledge was strictly limited by memory and proximity. If you wanted to share a complex idea or a detailed record, you had to rely on someone remembering it perfectly.
Which is tricky.
Or retelling it accurately, or you had to physically be there to show them. Suddenly, with writing, information could transcend both time and place. Knowledge could be accumulated, transmitted across generations, across vast distances. This foundational shift allowed for complex civilizations to truly emerge. It's hard to overstate.
That's a massive shift. And what's particularly striking about this early Sumerian writing is how dynamic it was, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't static, it kept evolving. How did it change from just simple pictures to something more complex, more abstract?
Absolutely. The Sumerian system started, quite literally with picture symbols, just straightforward representations of objects. A sun symbol meant, the sun.
Makes sense.
But as Sumerian society got more complex, they needed to express more abstract ideas. So these picture symbols transitioned into what we call ideographs. The sun symbol, for example, its meaning expanded. It could represent abstract concepts like day or light moving beyond just the physical sun.
So it wasn't just drawing what you saw anymore, it became about drawing what you meant. That's a huge conceptual leap. What kinds of challenges did that create for the scribes trying to represent these abstract ideas?
Precisely. And that led to another ingenious leap, the development of rebus writing. This is where picture symbols started representing the sounds of the objects they depicted, not just the objects themselves.
Okay, like a puzzle.
Exactly like a puzzle. These were essentially phonograms, graphic symbols for sounds. This was absolutely crucial because it allowed them to represent things like adverbs, prepositions, or even personal names, ideas that are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to just draw pictographically.
Right, how do you draw quickly?
Exactly. The highest development of cuneiform, as it became known, was using these abstract signs to represent whole syllable sounds made by combining more elementary sounds.
Wow.
And for a practical example, we have these cuneiform clay tablets from around 2100 BC. They weren't epic poems. They were simple, vital administrative records, listing expenditures of grain and animals, clear evidence of how writing fundamentally supported their society, their economy, enabling commerce and government on a whole new scale.
It's fascinating how, while the Sumerians were pushing towards this abstraction, another huge civilization took a completely different visual path, one that lasted for, millennia.
Indeed. Egyptian hieroglyphics, meaning sacred carving, largely retained their intricate picture writing system for almost 3,500 years, which really raises an important question. Why did one go abstract and the other stay pictorial for so incredibly long?
Yeah, why?
Well, the earliest known hieroglyphs date from about 3100 BC, right around when King Menes unified Egypt. And interestingly, Egypt was already influenced by Sumerian stuff like cylinder seals and the basic idea of writing by then.
Okay.
Yet, unlike the Sumerians, the Egyptians chose to keep their writing largely pictorial. The longevity is just incredible. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in AD 394, long after Egypt had become a Roman colony.
Wow.
Hieroglyphs were mainly used for religious and monumental purposes, you see. They were meant to convey permanence, divine order. For faster, everyday stuff, they developed other scripts.
So the visual beauty and that kind of sacred quality of hieroglyphs really dictated their longevity, maybe more than just pure efficiency, at least for those big monumental things.
That's a huge part of it. Egyptian scribes, when working on monuments, would carefully construct each picture glyph. But for quicker, daily use, they simplified these formal hieroglyphs into a faster gesture.
Like shorthand.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
By 1500 BC, they developed a cursory hieratic script, often used by priests. This was a pen stroke simplification, more abstract, more angular, partly because it used a rush pen instead of a pointed brush.
Okay.
Then, around 400 BC, an even more abstract script called demotic script came into secular use for commercial and legal writing.
Ah, for the practical stuff.
Exactly. And to give you a concrete idea of this evolution, just look at the hieroglyph for scribe itself. It began as this pictorial image of a brush holder, a palette, a sack of ink.
Right.
And you can clearly see how it transformed over time into more abstract forms through these different scripts, reflecting changing needs and tools.
Beyond just the scripts, how did the Egyptians use these powerful visual tools to document their beliefs, their daily lives, especially in those, really profound funerary practices?
Absolutely. The funerary papyri, the famous Book of the Dead, are a perfect example. And these weren't just for royalty. They were astonishingly customizable scrolls.
Customizable afterlife.
You could literally walk into a workshop and custom order your afterlife.
Right.
Choose the chapters, the number and quality of illustrations, even the length, anywhere from 15 feet up to an incredible 90 feet long, though some later ones were just a few inches square.
That's amazing.
These papyri narratively depicted the journey to the underworld. Take the Papyrus of Ani, for instance. You see Anubis, the jackal-headed god, getting ready to weigh Ani's heart against the feather of truth.
See if he was worthy.
Exactly, to see if he's true of voice. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe god, is right there, poised to write the verdict. And Amit, the monster, the devourer of the dead, is waiting just in case Ani fails the test. It paints such a vivid, almost cinematic picture of their spiritual beliefs.
And what about the artistic rules? How were figures and symbols shown in these elaborate works? Were there strict conventions?
Oh, very clear conventions. Men were typically shown with darker skin than women. Important people were drawn larger than less important ones.
A hierarchy.
Definitely. And the human body was always drawn as a two-dimensional schematic. You'd see a frontal body, but the arms, legs, and head were always in profile. Even the stylized eye reads as both profile and frontal at the same time.
Interesting.
But despite this flatness, Egyptian artists were remarkably good at observing and recording details within these strict rules. Aesthetically, the integration of text and image was just beautiful. The dense texture of the hieroglyphs contrasted so handsomely with the open spaces of flat colors of the illustrations.
Right.
And these Egyptian innovations, along with those from Mesopotamia, were truly pivotal. They triggered the development of the alphabet in Phoenicia and later in the Greco-Roman world, laying the groundwork for, well, how we all read and write today.
So from these really intricate pictorial systems, we see this move towards something fundamentally different, a system that simplifies, democratizes, and really sets the stage for rapid information sharing. What was the true transformative impact of the alphabet?
Well, alphabets represent one of humankind's grandest achievements, precisely because they stripped away all that built-in complexity of pictographs, ideographs, logograms, or syllabaries. Those early systems, like Sumerian or Egyptian, required long, hard study to master.
Right, only for the elite few.
Exactly. Literacy was limited to a powerful, often priestly or ruling few. The invention of the alphabet changed everything. It made knowledge vastly more accessible and fostered broader participation in society and public affairs. It was like the mortar binding whole communities together, freeing them from the limits of memory, time, and place. It literally democratized the power of information.
That sounds like a true intellectual revolution. Where did this simplified abstract system first really take hold?
The Phoenician alphabet. It was a purely abstract system, just 22 characters, and it was in use by 1500 BC. One of the oldest datable inscriptions we have is on the limestone sarcophagus of King Ahiram of Byblos from the 11th century BC.
Okay.
The Phoenicians wrote from right to left. There's a theory this might have come from stonemasons holding a chisel in their left hand and a hammer in their right, shaping letters as they moved across the stone.
Interesting detail.
Their early alphabet script was also written on papyrus with a brush or pen. The significance was just profound. Its efficiency allowed knowledge to spread rapidly, literacy increased exponentially compared to those complex, older systems. It really set the stage for widespread communication.
And moving closer to our modern letter forms, how did the Romans take these abstract symbols and refine them into those elegant capitals we still admire so much today?
Right, that brings us to the Roman inscriptional capitals, the absolute foundation of modern letter forms. These letters are incredibly elegant, with those characteristic
Those
strokes.
little feet on the letters.
Exactly, those beautiful small lines extending from the ends of the major strokes. There's actually a lot of debate about where they came from. Some think they were just chisel marks from the stonemason cleaning up the stroke ends.
Oh.
Others argue they were first drawn on the stone with a flat signwriter's brush, and the serifs were a short brush gesture to sharpen the termination. Either way, we know they were drawn first, then carved.
Okay.
What's fascinating is that these forms aren't just mathematical constructions. If you look closely at an inscription, a letter repeated multiple times will show subtle differences in width and proportion. It shows artistic judgment, a human touch, not just rigid calculation.
That's lovely.
And charmingly, some Roman inscriptions still contain tiny particles of red paint, leaving little doubt that these carved letters were originally painted. Gives them a whole different feel.
So with more efficient writing systems, these refined letter forms, how did the actual format of books themselves evolve? How did we get from scrolls to something more like what we use now?
Exactly, and that leads us straight to the codex revolution, a true paradigm shift in book format. Around the time of Christ, in Rome and Greece, the codex started to supplant the scroll, which was called a rotulus.
Right, the scroll.
With a codex, parchment was gathered into signatures, typically 2, 4, or 8 sheets, then folded, stitched, and combined, much like a modern book. The advantages were huge.
Easier to navigate.
Much easier. Scrolling through a long rotulus to find specific information was cumbersome, but a codex allowed for quick, random access to any page you wanted. Plus, papyrus was too fragile to be folded easily, and its vertical strips on the back made writing on both sides impractical.
Ah, okay.
But with durable parchment pages in a codex, you could use both sides. That dramatically saves storage space and material costs. This seemingly simple change had a huge impact on how knowledge was organized, accessed, preserved. It set the stage for the modern book.
It's amazing how a physical format change can have such a ripple effect.
And just as a powerful later example of alphabet innovation, think about Hangul, the Korean alphabet. Its design is incredibly logical. The consonants actually signify the structure of the mouth when speaking Korean.
Wow.
And the vowels are shown by placing dots next to vertical or horizontal lines. Then these characters are combined into blocks for syllables. It shows such a deep understanding of phonetics and visual representation centuries later.
Okay, so moving into the medieval period, we see something really special happening in those monastic scriptoria. They weren't just recording information anymore. They were elevating the written word, turning it into this spiritual, almost artistic experience.
What's fascinating here is how the aesthetics became so profoundly intertwined with devotion. Early Christian manuscripts, some were dyed with costly purple, lettered in silver and gold, visually stunning.
Luxurious.
Absolutely. And even though figures like St. Jerome, writing way back around 347-420, criticized this kind of wasteful extravagance, he actually blasted the practice in his preface to a manuscript book of Job, calling it useless. The sheer beauty speaks volumes about the era's deep dedication to the written word. It was an offering, a way to venerate the sacred text. This tension between, utility and artistic embellishment is a constant theme throughout graphic design history.
And alongside this deep reverence, the practical evolution of letter styles kept going, didn't it? Driven by that constant need for speed and legibility.
Precisely. We see the emergence of uncials. These were rounded, freely drawn majuscule letters prominent in Christian manuscripts from the 4th to the 9th centuries AD. Think of them as an early form of all caps, but faster to write.
Why faster?
Because their curves reduced the number of strokes needed, and they had fewer sharp, angular joints, which tended to clog up with ink. While some letters started hinting at ascenders or descenders, they were still basically capital letters.
Okay.
Then came the semi-uncials, or half-uncials. These really flourished in the 6th century and marked a significant step toward developing minuscules, or lowercase letters.
The beginnings of lowercase.
Exactly. Instead of just 2 guidelines for the main body of the letter, 4 were used. This allowed strokes to clearly soar above and sink below the main lines, creating true ascenders and descenders.
Like our B's and P's.
Precisely. This seemingly small innovation drastically improved legibility because it gave much better visual differentiation between letters. It really paved the way for our modern lowercase alphabet.
Now let's talk about the Celtic school of manuscript design. These aren't just texts. They're incredibly vibrant, almost psychedelic patterns that just pull you right in.
Oh, the Book of Kells and the Lindisfarne Gospels, created around 8800 and 698 respectively, they are absolute masterpieces of the Celtic style. They represent countless hours of meticulous work, often done in these quite stark monastic environments.
Right.
It does raise an important question. Why such incredibly dense ornamentation? And what innovation did they bring to readability amidst all that decoration?
Yeah, it seems almost contradictory.
The Lunks dedicated immense time to these, creating full-page illustrations framed by intricate borders, singling out opening pages of each gospel with these huge ornate initials. And perhaps most striking were the carpet pages.
Carpet pages.
Yeah, densely packed, geometric, and organic designs resembling oriental carpets. The one of the Lindisfarne Gospels with the Celtic cross motif is just breathtaking.
Yeah.
These weren't just decoration, they provided this meditative visual experience before you even got to the sacred text, like a visual prologue.
Wow. And amidst all that visual splendor, the Celts introduced something that seems so simple now, yet was truly revolutionary for reading, didn't they?
Yes. A truly radical design innovation in Celtic manuscripts was leaving a space between words.
Seems obvious now.
It seems so obvious to us now. But before this, words often just ran together in one continuous string of letters, scriptio continua. Reading was a laborious task of deciphering where one word ended and the next began. By separating them, it enabled the reader to separate the words much more quickly, and thus greatly improved legibility. It literally accelerated the reading process itself.
Amazing.
And the half-uncial script, which traveled to Ireland with early missionaries, was subtly redesigned into the Scriptura Scotica, or insular script. It became a national letterform style in Ireland, and it's still used for special writings today. These characters were full, rounded, creating a very distinctive texture on the page.
It's truly heartbreaking then to think that such a rich, unique artistic tradition was just cut short.
Sadly, yes. The magnificent Celtic school of manuscript design ended quite abruptly with Viking raids starting around AD 795. Both Lindisfarne and Iona, which were seats of two of the greatest scriptoria in medieval history, were destroyed.
Oh no.
The Book of Kells, for instance, had to be moved to Kells by escaping monks just to save it. We can only guess what majestic illuminated manuscripts might have been lost forever, or what further volumes might have been designed if peace and stability had continued for the Celts of Ireland. It's a poignant reminder of how external forces can impact, even truncate, artistic evolution, sometimes irrevocably.
So after this vibrant but tragically curtailed period, we see a deliberate effort, really driven from the top down, to bring order and standardization back to the fragmented world of writing across Europe.
Absolutely. By the late 8th century, the Emperor Charlemagne recognized the huge inconsistencies and difficulties in reading manuscripts across his vast empire. This was largely due to poorly trained scribes and all these localized writing styles that popped up.
A communication nightmare.
Pretty much. So he mandated reform through royal edict in AD 789. He brought scholars like Alcuin of York to his palace at Aachen to establish a school. There, a crowd of scribes, as it was called, were assembled to prepare master copies of important religious texts. This was a direct response to the lack of clarity and legibility that was hindering communication and education across his realm.
And this ambitious standardization effort led to the creation of a new, really foundational script that deeply influenced our modern alphabet, didn't it?
It did. This reform led directly to the development of Caroline minuscules. These were characterized by their economy of execution, they were relatively quick to write, and excellent legibility. This script is essentially the precursor to our modern lowercase letters. Much clearer, much more consistent than many of the scripts that came before it.
A real step forward.
A huge step. Once these master copies were produced, books and scribes were dispatched throughout Europe to spread the reforms. The goal was to ensure that across the continent, manuscripts would be easier to read and reproduce, establishing a new, unified visual standard for written communication. A prime example of this clarity can be seen in something like the Alcuin Bible from the 9th century AD.
As we move through the medieval period, it's so important to look beyond Christian Europe. Manuscript art was flourishing in other cultures too, each with its own distinct visual language, but often sharing that similar purpose of preserving and beautifying knowledge.
Indeed. If you look at the apocalyptic visions found in Spanish manuscripts, for example, there was this monastic dictum, Pictura es laecorum literatura. The picture is the layman's literature.
Ah, pictures for the illiterate.
Exactly. It clearly shows the motivation for illustrations, to convey information to those who couldn't read. These Spanish manuscripts, especially the commentaries on the Apocalypse of St. John the Divine by the monk Pieris, were filled with these terrifying depictions of the end of the world. They combined Christian prophecy with Moorish design influences, creating a unique style where pictures often assumed an importance rivaling the text itself. They were powerful teaching tools.
And how did these traditions manifest in Judaic and Islamic manuscript art? Were they equally vibrant?
Absolutely. Despite a common misconception that Judaic traditions rejected figurative art, artistic embellishment for educational or religious reasons was actually encouraged. Surviving Judaic illuminated manuscripts produced across Europe during this time are treasured masterworks. They express profound reverence for sacred objects and writings, often using incredibly intricate microcalligraphy, tiny writing to form decorative patterns.
Wow.
In the Islamic world, miniature paintings appeared in Persian books, probably even before AD 1000, and became a vital aspect of book illumination. The ruling Shahs of the Safavid dynasty between 1502 and 1736 heavily patronized the creation of these masterworks, filled with elaborate detail, precise geometric patterns, and vibrant color.
Beautiful.
This influence then spread to the Ottoman Empire and the Mughals in India. Mughal emperors actually brought Persian artists to India in the 16th century to train local artists, who then started incorporating native flora, fauna, and architecture into the manuscripts, creating this incredibly rich synthesis of styles.
So we have these incredibly intricate, handcrafted masterpieces being produced at the absolute pinnacle of the art form. But this golden age of manuscript illumination eventually faced an insurmountable challenge, didn't it?
It did, and it's quite poignant. The Limburg brothers, Paul, Herman, and Jan, they were Dutch goldsmiths born after 1385. They created absolute masterpiece illuminated books for the Duc de Berry in the early 15th century. Their work was the peak of this art form.
The best of the best.
Truly. But tragically, all three died before February 1416, likely victims of an epidemic, leaving their greatest masterpiece incomplete. Their exquisite handcrafted books represent the tragic irony of technological progress.
How so?
Well, imagine creating the absolute pinnacle of your art form, pouring years into it, only to discover that a new invention is simultaneously emerging that will, just by its sheer efficiency, render your painstaking craft economically obsolete.
Oh, wow.
Their handmade books were created at the exact same time woodblock printing appeared in Europe, and just 3 decades before movable type was invented by Gutenberg. This 1,000-year-old craft of illuminated manuscripts stretching back to antiquity was ultimately doomed to extinction by the typographic book, which offered a far more economical and rapid way to produce texts. It truly marked the end of an era.
All right, let's unpack this next massive leap. We've journeyed from ancient symbols all the way to the breathtaking artistry of illuminated manuscripts. Now we arrive at arguably the single most transformative invention in the history of communication.
Typography. It's really fascinating here to make a clear distinction first. Xylography. That's relief printing from a raised surface, like woodblock printing, which originated in Asia. Typography, on the other hand, is printing with independent, movable, and reusable bits of metal or wood, each with a raised letter form on it.
Got it. Separate letters.
Exactly. This invention, in the mid-1400s by the German inventor Johann Gutenberg, truly ranks right up there near the creation of writing itself, as one of civilization's most important advances. Writing gave humanity a way to store and retrieve knowledge. Typography allowed for its economical and multiple production. It unleashed immense potential for human dialogue on a scale never seen before.
And what makes Gutenberg's invention so fascinating is that it didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It arrived at precisely the right moment, fueled by this almost insatiable demand for knowledge across Europe.
That's absolutely right. Europe had this huge demand for books. You had a rising literate middle class, expanding universities, but traditional bookmaking was incredibly slow and expensive.
We talked about the monks.
Exactly. Think about a simple 200-page book. It required 4 to 5 months of labor by a single scribe, and the 25 sheepskins needed for the parchment, often even more expensive than the scribe's labor.
Wow. Costs adding up.
This context made Gutenberg's pursuit of a more efficient method incredibly timely, almost inevitable, really. He formed a partnership back in early 1438 in Strasbourg, initially for a secret mirror-making process, then for another secret process when the mirror fair got postponed. While the full details of his method were guarded secrets, the outcome was revolutionary.
And the very first products coming off these presses immediately showcased that revolutionary potential, didn't they?
Yes, you see things like Gutenberg's 31-line letters of indulgence, dating to around 1454. But the true breakthrough, I think, in terms of showcasing the power and the beauty of movable type came with Fürstenschoeffer's 1457 Psalter in Latin.
The Psalter, okay.
This is a monumental book, page size of 12 by 17 inches. Its major innovation was the use of large red and blue initials. These were printed from two-part metal blocks that were either inked separately and printed with the text in one go, or stamped in after the text was printed.
Complex process.
Very. But the typographic vitality and elegance of these decorated two-color initials truly rivaled the most beautiful manuscript pages. It was also the first book to bear a printer's trademark and imprint, a printed date, and a colophon.
What's a colophon?
It's basically a statement at the end of the book giving publication details. This one proudly declared, "This book of the Psalms, fashioned thus by an ingenious invention of printing and stamping without use of a pen by Johann Fust and Peter Schoeffer, 1457. It was a bold declaration of a new era. A bit of bragging, maybe."
Huh. Love it. So, beyond the technical marvel itself, what was the truly seismic, maybe even disruptive impact of movable type on European society?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, typography drastically reduced book prices. It turned what was a serious shortage of knowledge into an absolute abundance. The philosopher Alfred N. Whitehead observed how major advances in civilization can almost wreck the society where they occur.
Interesting point.
And typography, by democratizing information, inadvertently fueled the very upheavals of the Reformation and the Renaissance. It forced a radical reevaluation of authority, whether religious, political, or intellectual. It was a catalyst for revolutions of thought and power.
It sounds like it truly reshaped society at every single level. How did it specifically transform access to information and education? Did it reach far beyond the elite?
Oh, absolutely. The rapid dissemination of information was just unprecedented. This in turn led to a significant increase in literacy. Think about it. Literacy was of limited value to a medieval peasant who rarely saw a book.
Right.
But the tumbling book prices, the beginnings of popular writing like romantic novels, the proliferation of printed broadsides, suddenly reading became desirable, increasingly necessary for Renaissance townspeople.
A reason to learn.
Exactly. Education was revolutionized. The medieval classroom was often basically a scriptorium where each student painstakingly penned his own book. Typography made learning an increasingly private rather than communal process. Human dialogue, extended by type, started taking place on a global scale, bridging time and space.
Wow.
Furthermore, Gutenberg's invention was the first mechanization of a skilled handicraft. As such, it set in motion processes that would lead directly to the Industrial Revolution over the next 300 years. It also stabilized and unified languages.
How so?
Well, suddenly people all across France were reading the same material printed in French, overcoming provincial quirks of spelling and grammar. It turned languages like French, English, and German into typographic mass media.
It's always fascinating how new technologies don't just replace old ones, they often spark entirely new art forms. With the advent of printing, we quickly saw the rise of the illustrated topographic book, this powerful merger of ancient artistic traditions and cutting-edge tech.
Indeed. Block printers, the woodcut guys, initially feared typography as a threat to their livelihood, understandably.
Yeah.
But very early on, printers like Albrecht Pfister in Bamberg around 1460 began illustrating his books with woodblock prints. This created a booming demand for illustrators. It wasn't replacement, it was integration.
Ah, collaboration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This integration quickly gained traction. Augsburg and Ulm, which were already centers for woodblock playing card and religious print production, became key centers for illustrated books. Figures like Gunther Zehner and his relative Johann Zehner, who were actually scribes and illuminators themselves before becoming printers, established presses there. So it raises the question, how did these early illustrated books combine text and image, and what foundational works emerged from this fusion?
And surely a true monumental masterpiece of this early illustrated book era was the Nuremberg Chronicle, wasn't it? It feels like it truly showcased what was possible when art and type worked together.
Absolutely. Anton Koberger's Nuremberg Chronicle, published in 1493, is considered one of the great masterpieces of graphic design for the incunabula period that's the term for the earliest printed books, before 1501.
Got it.
It was an incredibly ambitious history of the world, from the biblical dawn of creation, right up to 1493. 600 pages, complex, carefully designed layout. It featured an astonishing 1,809 woodcut illustrations, on its large pages, about 47 by 32 centimeters.
Wow, that's huge. And tons of illustrations.
Tons. And the page layouts varied incredibly. You had full double-page illustrations, like the amazing one of the city of Nuremberg. You had woodcuts inserted right into the text or lined up in vertical columns, rectangular illustrations placed above or below type areas. It created this dense visual texture, where the rounded strokes of Koberger's sturdy Gothic types contrasted really handsomely with the tones and lines of the woodcuts.
It must have been visually stunning.
It was. And the illustrators used their imagination freely, depicting unseen monstrosities, unvisited cities, awful tortures, graphically expressing the story of creation. It's highly likely that Albrecht Dürer, who was Koberger's godson and apprentice to Michael Vollgemuth, one of the Chronicle's illustrators, actually assisted in the layout and illustration. You could almost feel his hand in its enduring visual power.
Speaking of Dürer, his genius wasn't just limited to illustration, was it? He extended his influence to the very design of letters themselves, bridging those German and Italian Renaissance ideas of form and proportion.
Dürer became a major influence in bringing that Renaissance spirit and its theoretical knowledge to Germany. He felt German artists lacked the theoretical foundation of their Italian counterparts. This inspired his 1525 book, A Course in the Art of Measurement with Compass and Ruler, a bit of a mouthful. But this work included beautifully proportioned Roman capitals, complete with clear instructions for how to construct them. Dürer related each letter to a square using a 1:10 ratio of the heavy stroke width to the letter's height, a proportion similar to the famous Trajan alphabet inscriptions.
Very precise.
Very. His meticulous approach significantly contributed to the evolution of alphabet design, establishing a new standard for rational letter construction. And German graphic design at this time continued its tradition of textura typography, that dense black letter style and vigorous woodcut illustrations. For example, Finzing's Türdenk, commissioned by Emperor Maximilian in 1517, featured types designed by the court calligrapher Vinzenz Rochner. These are an early example of the Fraktur style, which replaced the rigid angularity of textura with more flowing, curved strokes, adding a new elegance to German scripts.
Meanwhile, across the Alps in Italy, the Renaissance pursued a different aesthetic, didn't it? One focused on clarity, elegance, humanism, which profoundly shaped type design there.
Venice, as this major center of commerce and Europe's gateway to the East, really led Italian typographic book design. Johannes de Spira, a goldsmith from Mainz, got a 5-year monopoly on printing in Venice in 1469. His innovative Roman type shed some of the Gothic qualities seen in earlier fonts, making it look lighter, more open.
More Renaissance.
Exactly. And his brother, Vindelinus, later produced the first typographic book with printed page numbers in 1470. A small thing, maybe, but a significant step towards modern book organization.
And then came Aldus Manutius. His Aldine press became this epicenter of Renaissance humanism in print, setting completely new standards for scholarly and beautiful books.
Aldus Manutius, yeah. With his Aldine press, he had a clear mission. Publish the Greek classics, bring that ancient knowledge to a broader audience. He employed Francesco Griffo, a brilliant punch cutter who designed the exquisite Bembo type for Manutius, a typeface still admired and used today in various forms. Their 1499 publication, Hypnerotomachia Polifili, another mouth, is considered an absolute masterpiece of graphic design. It achieved this elegant harmony of typography and illustration that has seldom been equaled since. The way the illustrations coordinate with the text, the integration of image and type, suggests a really close collaboration between the printer, the type designer, the author, and the artist.
A total package.
Totally. Griffo's new capitals were based on precise research into Roman inscriptions, using that 1:10 stroke weight to high proportion favored by mathematicians. And he even made the lowercase ascenders, the tall parts of letters like B or D, taller than the capitals.
Why do that?
To correct an optical balance issue. See, in earlier Roman fonts, the capitals often looked disproportionately large and heavy next to the smaller lowercase letters, creating this visual imbalance on the page. Griffo's tweak made the overall text appear much more harmonious, smoother to read. Griffo's typefaces became the model for French type designers in the following century. The book itself, exquisite chapter headings, large outline initials, overall lightness, generous margins, fine paper, meticulous printing, it just excited printers and designers all across Europe. Interestingly, it was Manutius's only illustrated book. His staff focused on scholarly editions after that, but its impact was monumental.
So from Venice, this design momentum shifted westward to France. Visionary figures like Geoffrey Torrey and Claude Guéramont took that Roman type and refined it to near perfection, influencing centuries of typography after them.
Yes, Geoffrey Torrey, a truly multi-talented artist, painter, engraver, scholar, poet, author, printer, bookseller.
Wow, Renaissance man indeed.
Totally. He was instrumental in bringing those Italian Renaissance visual forms to France. His early lettering, seen in a 1506 manuscript book, Les Heures de Jean Lamont, had this light Roman style with unusually long ascenders and descenders. Torrey was also known for using powerful emblems, like the pot cassé, the broken jar.
What did that symbolize?
He explained it symbolized the body, with an augur representing fate, and a locked book signifying life after death. These were profound symbolic statements that elevated his graphic work beyond just decoration. He played a huge role in making Renaissance design the dominant influence on French graphics.
And then there's Claude Guéramont. His very name became synonymous with refined, elegant typefaces. And his work created a crucial new model for the whole industry, didn't it?
Claude Guéramont was pivotal. He was the first punch cutter to work independently of printing firms. His Roman typefaces, designed around the 1530s and 1540s, achieved such a level of perfection, such elegance and readability, that they helped basically eliminate Gothic styles from printers' type cases all over Europe except Germany. They held onto their black letter.
Stubborn Germans.
Well, it was part of their identity. Guéramont established an independent type foundry to sell cast type directly to printers. This was a crucial step away from that earlier model where one person might be the scholar, publisher, type founder, printer, and bookseller, like back in Meggs.
Specialization starts.
Exactly. Guéramont's fonts achieved this mastery of visual form, a tighter fit between letters which allowed for closer word spacing, and a beautiful harmony among capitals, lowercase letters, and italics. His work really marked a point where the influence of handwriting as a model diminished, and typography started developing its own distinct language of form, rooted in the processes of making stale punches, casting metal type, printing rather than just imitating quill-drawn forms.
A language unto itself.
Precisely. And his typefaces remained profoundly influential for over 2 centuries, until the late 1700s, even after he died in poverty and his widow had to sell off his punches. Their quality ensured their widespread, enduring use.
But like so many golden ages, this French typographic zenith eventually faced significant disruption, didn't it?
No, tragically, it ended quite abruptly. France was plunged into 4 decades of devastating religious wars, starting with the massacre on March 1, 1562. Many Huguenot printers, French Protestants, were forced to flee the country to escape religious strife, censorship, and rigid trade laws.
Oh, brain drain.
A massive brain drain for French printing. Just as the momentum for innovative graphic design had moved from Italy to France, it now passed from France into the Low Countries, particularly the cities of Antwerp and Amsterdam. The center of innovation shifted once more due to political and religious turmoil.
Okay, so as that golden age of French typography concludes, we start seeing new styles and approaches popping up across Europe, often driven by royal commissions, sometimes by the sheer genius of individual designers. How did this period lay the groundwork for the diverse font families we recognize today?
Well, this period saw a very deliberate pursuit of refinement and consistency in type design. A prime example is the Romain du Roi, the King's Roman. This was a new typeface commissioned by Louis XIV back in 1692 for the Imprimerie Royale, the royal printing office.
Designed by committee.
Almost. It was designed by a committee of scholars on a precise grid, 2,304 tiny squares. It featured increased contrast between thick and thin strokes, sharp horizontal serifs, and a really even balance in each letter form.
Very rational.
Extremely rational. Now, its minute refinement on that superfine grid kind of got lost when it was reduced down to text size, but it fundamentally initiated the idea of a transitional typeface, something bridging the old style and the modern styles. It paved the way for more rational geometric type design.
And the very idea of a type family, visually harmonious fonts in different weights and styles that all work together, that really took root here, didn't it?
Absolutely. Pierre-Simon Fournier-Lejeune, a truly prolific type designer in Paris, publishes Modèle des caractères de l'imprimerie in 1742. It presented an astonishing 4,600 characters.
Wow.
All of which he had designed and cut punches for himself over 6 years. He really initiated the concept of a type family, meaning a group of visually compatible fonts available at a variety of weights and widths that could be mixed harmoniously on the page.
Giving designers options.
Tons of options. He also pioneered casting single, double, and triple ruled lines as type. He offered the largest metal type yet made, up to 108 points. And his decorative types, his ornaments and rules, worked remarkably well with his Roman fonts. He gave designers a much bigger toolkit than they'd ever had before.
Okay, what about the British masters of this era? Figures like Caslon and Baskerville really seem to have pushed the boundaries of both type design and the printing process itself.
Indeed. William Caslon worked mostly within the established old-style Roman tradition, the one that originated back in the Italian Renaissance. Very solid, very legible. But John Baskerville, born in 1706, he was a true innovator. He fundamentally broke the prevailing rules of design and printing.
How so?
He was involved in every single facet of bookmaking for the 56 editions produced at his press in Birmingham. He designed, cast, and set type. He improved the printing press itself, ensuring perfect alignment between the platen, the part that presses down, and the smooth stone press bed. This allowed for really even, crisp impressions.
Attention to detail.
Immense attention to detail. He also conceived and commissioned new kinds of paper and even developed his own unique ink. It was made of boiled linseed oil aged with black or amber resin for this really dense, lustrous black that almost bordered on purple. Just beautiful.
And his paper innovations sound quite revolutionary for the time as well. What did he do there?
They were. Baskerville developed smooth wove paper. This eliminated the wire marks you see in older laid paper, resulting in a much cleaner, more uniform surface for printing.
Ah, smoother finish.
Exactly. He also innovated a process to hot press or calendar the paper after printing. This involved pressing the sheets between heated metal plates, resulting in a smooth, refined, almost glossy surface. This actually led him to develop a steady side business in stationery.
Smart move.
Very. Now, while his bold innovations were met with a bit of indifference, even hostility, in Britain at the time,
Really?
some found his type too sharp, too stark, compared to the softer Caslon styles. But his type and book designs profoundly influenced continental designers, like the Italian Giambattista Bodoni and the Dada family in Paris. He set a new international standard for printing excellence that resonated for centuries.
Beyond just letters and books, this era also saw the very first systematic ways of presenting data visually. It sounds incredibly modern thinking about infographics, but the roots go way back here.
What's fascinating here is the intellectual origin of information graphics. The foundation is actually analytic geometry, developed by the French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist René Descartes back in 1637.
Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
That's the one. He used algebra to solve geometry problems and represent points in space with numbers. He introduced the concept of drawing perpendicular intersecting lines, the x and y axes, on a plane.
The graphs we learned in school?
Exactly. Any point on that plane could then be specified by two numbers, one defining its distance from the horizontal axis, and the other from the vertical axis. This seemingly abstract mathematical concept is the absolute basis for all charts, graphs, and data visualization you see today, from simple bar charts to complex interactive infographics. It was a revolutionary way to literally see relationships hidden in data.
As the 18th century drew to a close, visionary artists like William Blake started pushing the very boundaries of printing, didn't they? Transforming it into a medium for intensely personal, even mystical expression, a real counterpoint to the precision of Bodoni and Dada.
Blake, yes, a visionary English poet and artist born in 1757. He pioneered what he called illuminated printing. After his brother Robert died, Blake claimed Robert's soul appeared to him in a dream and told him how to print his poems and illustrations together as relief etchings without using traditional typography.
Wow, how did that work?
It involved writing and drawing directly onto a copper plate with an acid-resistant medium, then etching away the surrounding area, leaving the design standing in relief, ready to be inked and printed like a woodblock. This unique method allowed for this direct, seamless integration of his art and text, creating these highly expressive works that truly stood apart from the commercial printing of the time. It allowed his deeply personal vision to be mass-produced in a way.
Incredible.
And this period also saw a real surge in British printing excellence overall. The Shakespeare Press was established in 1786 with the explicit goal of rivaling the splendor of those grand French and Italian folio volumes. To do this, they had to set up their own printing house, type foundry, and ink manufactory. William Martin, who was actually a former apprentice to Baskerville, designed types for them that combined Baskerville's majestic proportions with the sharper contrasts of the newer modern fonts. Then William Bulmer printed major works like Shakespeare and Milton, showcasing a new level of typographic artistry in Britain.
Okay, let's fast forward now into the 19th century, an era that truly exploded with new technologies. a dizzying array of typeface designs, and this profound fracturing of the design process itself. How did the Industrial Revolution fundamentally reshape how graphic communications were created and consumed?
The Industrial Revolution's din and thunder, as one historian put it, truly turned the world upside down. It profoundly changed the nature of visual information. Handicrafts greatly diminished as the unity of design and production ended.
What do you mean by unity?
Before, a craftsman might design and fabricate an entire object, or a printer would be involved in every aspect from type design to the actual printing. But over the course of the 19th century, the factory system fractured graphic communications into separate design and production components.
Specialization again.
Exactly. This led to specialization, where designers were often separate from the fabricators, the printers, the engravers. It created a new, much more complex ecosystem for visual production.
And this specialization must have had a huge impact on the sheer variety of typefaces available, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was an explosion of typographic sizes and letterform styles. Letterpress printers were facing increasing pressure from lithography, where skilled craftsmen could draw directly onto stone plates from an artist's sketch, limited only by imagination.
Competition driving innovation.
Precisely. Type founders responded to this competition with an unprecedented outpouring of new designs, trying to offer printers more eye-catching options. This era introduced entirely new categories of type. We saw the advent of Egyptian type, characterized by heavy, condensed slab serifs. Really bold, perfect for impactful headlines and posters.
Slab serifs, okay.
Then came sans serif fonts letters without serifs. They were called Gothic in the US, or grotesques in England. Vincent Figgins notably dubbed his 1832 specimen sans serif, and that name stuck. By mid-century, serifless alphabets were seeing increased use, especially in Germany.
Still feels modern.
It does. There were also Tuscan styles with these wild ornamental serifs and Ionic types, which restored a slight bracket to the slab serif, making them a bit more refined. Robert Besley's Clarendon, introduced in 1845, was a hugely popular adaptation of Ionic, renowned for its legibility, even in bold weights.
A lot happening.
A lot.
Yeah.
And beyond type, the arrival of photography expanded the very meaning of visual documentation. And the widespread use of color lithography passed the aesthetic experience of colorful images from the privileged few to the whole of society. This century was just dynamic, exuberant, often chaotic, a period of incredible invention and proliferation for graphic design.
That relentless drive for efficiency eventually led to maybe one of the most significant mechanical inventions for printing ever, something that radically sped up the production of text and truly unleashed mass communication.
That's the linotype machine, perfected by Ottmar Mergenthaler in 1886. Before this, setting type by hand was just painstakingly slow and costly. Think about it. By the mid-19th century, presses could churn out 25,000 copies an hour.
Impressive speed.
But every single individual letter, in every word, in every book, newspaper, and magazine, still had to be picked out of a case and set into lines by hand.
Mind-boggling bottleneck.
Totally. Dozens of inventors worked to perfect a machine to compose type. Over 300 machines were patented before the linotype finally cracked it. Even Mark Twain invested millions searching for a solution.
Wow, Twain.
Yeah, he lost a fortune on a failed typesetting machine. The linotype machine transformed the industry. Before it, the high cost and slow pace of composition limited even the largest daily newspapers to about 8 pages. Books remained fairly precious. The linotype made books less precious, allowed newspapers to expand rapidly. It led directly to the age of mass communication, with words and pictures spreading globally at an unprecedented speed. It fundamentally changed how quickly information could be disseminated.
And in parallel with that mechanical revolution, a completely new way of capturing reality emerged, one that would forever change how images were created and reproduced.
Indeed. Photography. The basic concept of the camera obscura, that darkened room or box with a small hole projecting an image that was known way back to Aristotle in the 4th century BC. Artists had used it as a drawing aid for centuries.
Right.
The missing piece was a light-sensitive material capable of capturing and permanently fixing that projected image. William Henry Fox Talbot, an Englishman, apparently became frustrated with his poor drawing skills while sketching in Italy in 1833.
Necessity is the mother.
Exactly. This frustration directly inspired his pioneering research into a process that would form the basis for both photography as we know it and photographic printing plates.
And early on, there were distinct pioneering photographic processes that offered different qualities, different possibilities, weren't there?
Yes, absolutely. Louis Daguerre's daguerreotype, presented to the world in 1839, was a revelation. It involved a highly polished, silver-plated copper sheet sensitized with iodine vapor, exposed in a camera, then developed with heated mercury vapor.
Sounds complicated and dangerous.
A little bit. But it produced incredibly clear, detailed, one-of-a-kind images. The detail was astonishing for the time. However, it had limitations. The size was predetermined by the plate, the polished surface produced glare, and the image would strangely reverse itself laterally unless viewed at the precise angle.
Okay.
In contrast, Fox Talbot, also in 1839, pioneered the photogram. This was a cameraless shadow picture, created by simply placing objects directly onto light-sensitive paper and exposing it to light. Much simpler, different aesthetic.
Right, like silhouettes.
Exactly. But the true democratization of photography, putting it in everyone's hands, broadened significantly with George Eastman's Kodak camera, introduced in 1888. It was simple enough for anyone who can wind a watch, as his ads famously stated. It put the power of creating images, recording their own lives, into the hands of the general public. A huge shift.
So how did this revolutionary new medium of photography begin to integrate with and ultimately transform the existing printing industry? How did photos get onto the printed page?
Well, initially, photography wasn't printed directly very often. It was frequently used as a research tool for wood-engraved illustrations. For instance, Matthew Brady's really poignant 1865 photograph, Freedman on the Canal Bank at Richmond, that was actually redrawn by an illustrator for Scribner's magazine before direct reproduction from the photo was possible.
So traced or copied by hand.
Pretty much. Wood engraving blocks had the advantage of being type high, meaning they could be locked into a letterpress form and printed right alongside the metal type, unlike copperplate or steel engravings, which required separate press runs. However, preparing these wood engraved blocks was very costly and time-consuming.
Right.
Gradually, inventors developed photo engraving processes throughout the latter half of the 19th century. These used photographic methods to transfer the image onto a metal plate, which was then etched to create a relief printing surface. This dramatically reduced both the cost and time required to produce printing blocks and achieved much greater fidelity to the original photographic image, laying the groundwork for how we print images today.
The explosion of images wasn't just confined to black and white, though. Color, once such a luxury in print, became widely accessible and vibrant, thanks to innovations like chromolithography.
Chromolithography really dominated color printing from about 1860 to 1900. It was truly its heyday. German immigrants like Louis Prang, who arrived in Boston in 1850, were pivotal. Prang, with his extensive knowledge of printing chemistry and business acumen, made colorful, popular work, establishing his firm in 1856. His intricate crayon-style images achieved remarkable realism for the time.
So posters and things.
Posters, greeting cards, art reproductions. But also, this process allowed for complex montage designs on posters, and significantly, it enabled printing on tin for labels and packaging.
Printing on metal.
They developed transfer printing processes. Images were printed onto thin paper, then transferred onto sheet metal under great pressure. In 1875, an Englishman named Robert Barclay even patented offset lithographic printing on tin, using a rubber-coated cylinder to transfer the ink. This led to the widespread use of colorful printed tin packages for food and tobacco products all throughout Europe and North America. It really brought vibrant color into everyday life in a new way.
Amidst all this rapid technological change, we also saw what's often called a golden age for illustration, where artists truly defined visual narratives and shaped popular culture.
Absolutely. Randolph Caldecott, born in 1846, pioneered these humorous, personified drawing styles that became prototypes for children's books and much later animated films. His ability to exaggerate movement and facial expressions just brought his work to life, creating a world where ordinary objects and animals had distinct personalities. Really charming. Thomas Nast, on the other hand, became the father of American political cartooning. He famously popularized enduring symbols like Santa Claus as we know him, John Bull for England, the Democratic donkey, the Republican elephant.
He created those.
He popularized their visual forms, and even Columbia, who became the prototype for the Statue of Liberty. His work stripped away unnecessary detail to introduce powerful symbols for communicative effectiveness, especially in the public sphere. He was hugely influential.
And Howard Pyle is an absolute towering figure in American illustration from this period, isn't he? His name comes up again and again.
Howard Pyle launched what's known as the Golden Age of American illustration, spanning the decades from the 1890s roughly until the 1940s. He was a major force, published over 3,300 illustrations and 200 texts. Pyle was known for his meticulous research, elaborate staging of scenes, and historical accuracy.
Very detailed.
Very. This inspired a younger generation of graphic artists, people like N.C. Wyeth, to carry forward this tradition of realism in America. His career evolved directly alongside new reproduction technologies. He started with ink-line drawings for Scribner's Monthly, which were then painstakingly cut into wood engravings by craftsmen. Later, he adapted to photo engraving technologies. You can clearly trace the impact of photography as a new communications tool and how his illustrations became more documentary and realistic over time.
But as the industrial age gained momentum, not everyone embraced its fragmentation and, well, maybe its perceived lack of soul. A powerful counter-movement emerged, championing craftsmanship and a return to the unity of design. So what did this mean for how art, design, and production were perceived and practiced?
This was the arts and crafts movement, led by figures like William Morris in England, born in 1834. Morris was deeply troubled by the gulf that the machine age seemed to create between people's material life and their sensory and spiritual needs. He sought to restore the medieval ideal of craftsmanship, believing passionately in the unity of all arts, painting, architecture, furniture, textiles, printing.
All connected.
All connected.
Yeah.
His Kelmscott Press, founded in 1891, produced books with incredible care and attention to detail. He designed beautiful typefaces based on earlier historical models, used handmade paper, rich woodcut illustrations and borders, and aimed for a total design unity where every single detail related harmoniously to the whole book.
That's expensive.
Oh, they were very expensive. The irony is, this crusader for handicraft, who created books so exquisite they were almost artworks in themselves and only affordable by the wealthy, became the inspiration for a fine book design revival that lasted well into the 20th century. And ultimately, his ideas about quality, materials, and integrated design filtered down into commercial printing, elevating standards of quality and design consciousness across the entire industry. It proved that even a rejection of technology could have a profound, positive influence.
And Morris's ideals of integrated art and craftsmanship resonated far beyond England, didn't they? Across Europe and even into America.
He certainly did. Arthur H. McMurdo, an architect born in 1851, founded the Century Guild in 1882, directly inspired by Morris. Their goal was to elevate the design arts, furniture, stained glass, graphics to the same level of respect as painting and sculpture. They incorporated Renaissance and, interestingly, Japanese design ideas into their work, providing a crucial link between the arts and crafts movement and the emerging Art Nouveau style.
Ah, the next big thing.
Exactly. Their publication, the Century Guild Hobby Horse, starting in 1884, was the first finely printed magazine devoted exclusively to the visual arts. And McMurdo's swirling organic forms, like those he designed for his 1883 book, Rennes City Churches, were pure Art Nouveau, really born ahead of their time, anticipating the fluid lines of the new century. This period also saw that decline of fussy Victorian typefaces in the 1890s, leading to revivals of classical typefaces Garamond, Plantin, Caslon, Baskerville, Boudoni. American Type Founders, ATF, played a key role in making these historical designs accessible again, commissioning new cuts and promoting them heavily, shaping the typographic landscape for decades to come. It was a look backward that paved the way forward.
Okay, so as the 20th century dawned, the world was in the state of unprecedented ferment world wars looming, revolutionary technologies like cars and planes shifting social orders. How did graphic design and the art world more broadly respond to this profound upheaval?
Well, this was a period of truly radical change in, well, all aspects of the human condition. Modern art movements profoundly affected design, leading first to what we now call Art Nouveau. Now, it's often dismissed today as just, mere decoration.
A bit fussy sometimes.
Maybe, but it was actually a pivotal transitional style. It rejected the historicism, that constant borrowing from the past that had dominated 19th century design, and it prepared the way for modernism by replacing that almost servile use of past forms with entirely new, inventive ones. It really created a bridge between Victorian clutter and the new modern aesthetic that was coming.
Can you paint a picture of its defining visual characteristics? And maybe introduce us to some of its most influential figures. Who were the key players?
Art Nouveau is characterized by these organic linear movements, flowing lines, elegant motifs often inspired by nature, free and graceful curves. It championed a unified approach where decoration, structure, and function were integrated, rather than ornament just being stuck onto a surface.
Built in, not added on.
Exactly. Its forms were often invented, not copied, pointing towards abstract art. Key figures include Baron Victor Horta, a Belgian architect whose 1892 townhouse in Brussels was unified by these incredible tendrilless, curvilinear networks in the ironwork, the woodwork, everywhere. Every detail flowed together.
Wow.
Jules Charest in France was a pioneer of the visual poster, active from the 1860s right up to 1900. He was convinced that pictorial lithographic posters would replace purely typographic ones. He was famous for integrating words and images seamlessly and became so influential he was named to the Legion of Honor for advancing printing and commerce.
High praise.
And Alphonse Mucha, working mainly from 1895 to 1900, his work really defined le style Mucha, which is often synonymous with Art Nouveau. His dominant theme was this central female figure, often surrounded by stylized plants, motifs from Moravian folk art, Byzantine mosaics, very lush, very decorative, but integrated. This style had various names across Europe. Jugendstil in Germany, Sessionstil in Austria, Stile Floreal in Italy.
And beyond the big French masters, how did this flowing organic style manifest itself in other parts of Europe and in America? Was it as popular?
It was influential everywhere. Will Bradley, an American designer, was inspired by English sources like Aubrey Beardsley and pioneered the chapbook style. He used old Caslon types, wide letter spacing, mixed different fonts, and incorporated sturdy woodcuts, giving his books and posters this distinctive handcrafted feel that was still mass-produced. Quite influential.
Okay.
Ethel Reed was the first American woman to achieve national prominence as a graphic designer and illustrator, mainly between 1894 and 98. She created these bold, symbolic posters with flat shapes and striking color, but her career ended rather mysteriously after just a few years. André van de Velde, a Belgian architect, painter, designer, educator, active from 1892. He synthesized Japanese prints, French Art Nouveau, and the English arts and crafts movement into this unified style. He called for a new art with vitality and ethical integrity. Later, he became really influential in design theory, demanding appropriate materials, functional forms, and a unity of visual organization, seeing ornament not as decoration but as a means of expression.
So, moving beyond these expressive organic lines of Art Nouveau, some designers started seeking a more rigorous, geometric, almost architectural approach, right? Especially in Germany and Austria.
That's right. This shift led to the Wiener Werkstätte, the Vienna workshops founded in 1903 by Joseph Hoffmann and Coleman Moser. It was conceived as a spiritual continuum of William Morris's workshops back in England.
Ah, that connection again.
Exactly. They aimed for a close union of fine and applied arts in designing everyday objects, furniture, ceramics, metalwork, graphics. They explicitly rejected poorly designed mass production and that reliance on historicism. Their key principles were function, honesty to materials, and harmonious proportion. Decoration was used only when it served these goals, often aiming to make the functional beauty of an object clear, laying it bare. Very influential in pushing towards modernism.
And Peter Behrens is an absolute titan of this era, isn't he? Especially for his foundational work in what we now call corporate identity. He seems crucial.
Peter Behrens is often called the architect of corporate identity, a major figure in German design. In terms of typographic reform, he designed the Behrenschrift typeface in 1901 for the Klingspor foundry. It was very distinct from the ornate, fussy types common at the time.
How is it different?
He consciously sought a universal, uniquely German type. He combined the heavy density of traditional German blackletter with the proportions of Roman inscriptions and a standardized, almost modular construction. It emphasized horizontals and verticals, giving it a powerful modern feel.
Interesting blend.
Behrens also advanced this philosophy of Gesamtkultur, advocating for a new universal culture, existing in a totally reformed man-made environment, with design as the engine driving this transformation.
Big ideas.
Huge ideas. His work for AEG, the German General Electric Company from 1907 to 1914, became a prototype for all future corporate identity evolution. He designed everything for them: street lamps, tea kettles, simple forms shorn of decoration, factory architecture like the iconic turbine hall in 1909, where the form was directly determined by function with exposed steel girders and glass walls.
Or follows function.
Exactly. His work for AEG became a landmark, planting the seeds for modernism. And crucially, his apprentices included future titans of modern architecture: Walter Gropius, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and Le Corbusier. So his philosophy clearly had a massive impact.
His influence truly sounds foundational for modernism. And across the English Channel, Edward Johnston was making equally significant, though maybe more understated, contributions to clarity and iconic visual identity, wasn't he? Thinking about the London Underground.
Edward Johnston, yes, a British designer who made a huge impact, particularly with the London Underground. Frank Pick, who became head of underground publicity in 1908, was a vocal critic of the visual chaos of advertising in the stations. He sought to bring design order to the entire system.
A man with a vision.
Definitely. He commissioned Johnston to design a new typeface, Johnston's railway type, in 1916. These were elemental letterforms, prototypes for reductive design, simple, clear, highly legible, perfect for a public constantly in motion.
Still looks modern today.
It really does. Johnston also revised the iconic London Underground logo in 1918, the roundel. He used his new typeface on a blue bar placed in front of a red circle. It's a design that, with minor modifications, is still used today. It embodies timeless simplicity and clarity.
Amazing longevity.
And Pick's design patronage extended beyond just fonts and logos. He oversaw signage, station architecture, even train and bus design, making a massive positive contribution to London's environment and becoming an international model for corporate design responsibility and the power of unified design thinking.
Okay, so the early 20th century was this crucible of intense artistic experimentation. How did those radical art movements we hear about, Cubism, Futurism, Dada, surrealism, how did they directly influence and even transform graphic design?
Well, these movements radically altered, well, everything. All aspects of the human condition. They shook traditions to their foundations. Graphic design, particularly the poster, had to find this new balance between expressive, often fragmented images and clear visual organization to communicate persuasively. This dialogue, this tension, generated immense energy and pushed the boundaries of what visual communication could actually do.
Let's dive into Cubism and Futurism first. How did their groundbreaking approaches to form, space, and motion translate into a new visual language for designers?
In Cubism, artists like Fernand Léger moved away from its initial more abstract impulses toward more recognizable forms, like in his painting, The City. His use of geometric letter forms and these almost pictographic simplifications of the human figure in his graphic work, like for Blaise Cendra's anti-war book, La Fin du Monde, really pointed the way for modernist pictorial graphics. It defined a modern design sensibility, emphasizing structure and flat planes of form.
And Futurism, more dynamic.
Very dynamic. Futurism, championed by the Italian poet Filippo Marinetti, advocated for words and freedom typography. It challenged traditional static layout by trying to express motion, energy, speed, cinematic sequence. They often used words as concrete visual shapes themselves, not just as carriers of meaning, breaking the lines using different sizes and weights.
Visually
deliberately so. And Guillaume Apollinaire's calligrams in 1918 were poems where the letter forms were arranged to form visual designs or pictographs. Like his poem Il Pleut, It Rains, where the letters literally sprinkled down the page like rain. He was exploring the fusion of poetry and painting, introducing simultaneity to the printing page, forcing the reader to engage with text as image in a new way.
Then, as this direct, defiant reaction to the utter chaos and senselessness of World War I, came Dada. What was their impact?
Dada, reacting against the horrific carnage of WWI, claimed to be anti-art. It was concerned with shock, protest, nonsense. It rejected all tradition, sought complete freedom from convention. It was born when Hugo Ball opened the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich in 1916, providing a haven for artists to express their disillusionment and disgust.
And graphically?
Its key contribution to graphic design was photomontage. This technique of manipulating found photographic images, cutting them up, rearranging them to create jarring juxtapositions and chance associations became a really powerful tool for social and political commentary. Roel Houseman and Hannah Hook were creating outstanding work in this medium as early as 1918.
Collages with photos.
Exactly, but with a critical edge. Kurt Schwitters, another central figure, played sense against nonsense in his poetry and later, influenced by constructivism, ran a successful graphic design studio in Hanover, showing how even anti-art ideas could inform commercial work. Dadaists helped strip typographic design of its traditional rules and continued Cubism's idea of letterforms as concrete visual shapes. For instance, Ilya Zdanovich's poster for the Party of the Bearded Heart used over 40 different fonts just to achieve vitality and legibility, a bold rejection of typographic harmony that sought to shock and engage the viewer.
And following Dada's chaos, surrealism emerged, delving deep into the subconscious, the world of dreams. How did this impact graphic expression?
Surrealism entered the Paris scene in 1924 with André Breton's Manifesto. It searched for the more real than real, the world of intuition, dreams, the unconscious realms explored by Freud. They believed true reality lay beyond conscious thought, in the irrational.
Dream logic.
Precisely. Max Ernst pioneered techniques like frottage, making rubbings from textured surfaces, and decalcomania, transferring paint squashed between surfaces to incorporate unexpected, chance-generated images and textures into his art. René Magritte, a more figurative surrealist, used jolting scale changes, defied gravity and light, created unexpected juxtapositions like a train emerging from a fireplace. He maintained this poetic dialogue between reality and illusion, which profoundly inspired visual communications by opening up new ways to depict the absurd, the dreamlike, the uncanny.
So, what was surrealism's lasting impact on design?
It liberated the human spirit, in a way. It pioneered new techniques for image creation and demonstrated how fantasy and intuition could be expressed visually. Even if its ideas were sometimes later trivialized or watered down in mass media advertising, its core impulse to tap the subconscious remains influential.
And even before these movements really took hold, back in Germany, Expressionism was channeling raw emotion. How did its visual intensity find its way into graphic design?
Expressionism emerged in Germany before WWI, focusing on depicting subjective emotions, inner psychological states, rather than objective reality. Color, drawing, proportion, they were often exaggerated or distorted to heighten emotional impact. Symbolic content was crucial for conveying deeper meaning.
Less about accuracy, more about feeling.
Exactly. Bold contour drawing, thick paint applications, vivid, often clashing color contrasts were common. Woodcuts, lithographs, and posters were important media for many expressionists because they allowed for powerful, direct visual communication of intense feelings. They often had this raw, graphic quality that lent itself really well to print media, influencing poster design significantly.
So from these radical art movements, we see this direct, powerful inspiration for a new wave of pictorial modernism in posters, simplifying complex ideas into incredibly potent visual statements.
Absolutely. The beggar staffs, that was the pseudonym for two English artists, William Nicholson and James Pride, working in the 1890s. They were real pioneers in this. They reduced images to the absolute minimum of visual information, often using cut paper to create pure flat shapes, bold silhouettes.
Ahead of their time.
Very much so. They initially faced rejection for their radical simplicity. Their work was seen as too abstract, unfinished even, but they proved highly influential in paving the way for poster design that distilled the message down to its absolute essence, stripping away all ornamentation for raw, immediate impact.
This emphasis on simplification led directly to what became known as plakat style, or poster style, in Germany, didn't it? That seems like a direct descendant.
Yes, the plakat style was absolutely defined by simplicity and reduction. Lucian Bernhard in Germany, back in 1905, created his iconic Priester Matches poster. Legend has it he kept removing elements until only the product, the brand name, and the matches themselves remained. It reduced communication to one word, and two, match is a critical step in simplifying naturalism into this visual language of shape and sign.
Less is more.
Very much so. Bernhard's approach involved flat color shapes, the product name, and the product image. Simple, direct, memorable. He applied this to over 300 packages, demonstrating its commercial power. His bold sans serif lettering style was even cast in metal as a typeface in 1910. During WWI, the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, continued these secessionist and plakat still traditions in their war posters. They integrated words and images, simplifying them into powerful shapes, like Bernhard's famous poster of a clenched fist in armor for the Seventh War Loan, creating immediate, forceful messages. Ludwig Holbein of Munich, initially inspired by the beggar staffs, also reduced images to flat shapes, but often applied rich textures and decorative patterns, giving his WWI posters a unique visual depth while still maintaining that core simplicity.
And in France, A.M. Cassandra became an undisputed master. His posters revitalized advertising art and profoundly influenced how we see integrated design even today.
A.M. Cassandra, yes.
Yeah.
He immigrated to Paris from Ukraine and truly revitalized French advertising art from 1923 to 1936. His bold, simple designs emphasized two-dimensionality, using broad, simplified planes of color. He reduced subjects to iconographic symbols, moving very close to synthetic cubism, where objects are broken down into geometric shapes but remain recognizable.
Memorable icons.
Exactly. Cassandra was exceptionally skilled at integrating words and images into total compositions. He used telegraphic copy, very brief text, powerful geometric forms, and these striking pictographic silhouettes. His posters for newspapers like L'Intransigeant, where he cleverly cropped the paper's name to just L'Intran, the commonly used abbreviation, and for railways and steamship lines, like the famous L'Atlantique poster.
The giant ship.
That one. It showcased exaggerated scale and monolithic qualities to signify safety and strength. His Dubonnet liqueur ads even used a cinematic sequence of word and image across multiple posters, where a figure transforms from a line drawing to full color as the beverage is consumed. It became a hugely popular trademark and a revolutionary approach to narrative and advertising.
Like a storyboard.
Pretty much. Georgie Keeps described Cassandra's use of the equivocal contour line, where a single line might define two different shapes or forms, creating visual puns and forcing the viewer to participate actively in deciphering the message. Jean Carlu also created strong, terse messages where word and image interlocked, very notable in his later U.S. war effort posters during WWII.
A distinctly different, yet equally powerful flavor of modernism emerged from revolutionary Russia, driven by this profound belief in pure geometry and art's absolute service to society.
This was Russian constructivism,
Yeah.
a powerful force that believed art shouldn't be in a gallery, it should serve society and production. Artists like L. Lissitzky developed what he called PRUs, projects for the affirmation of the new. These were abstract visual ideals that he translated into groundbreaking graphic design and architecture.
Like blueprints for a new world.
Exactly. His famous Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge poster from 1919 is a quintessential example. It uses a dynamic red wedge symbolizing the Bolshevik army, slashing diagonally into a static white sphere, representing Kerensky's counter-revolutionary white forces. Diagonal slogans reinforced this energetic movement, creating an incredibly forceful and immediate visual message that transcended language barriers, which was crucial for a population with varying literacy levels.
What were the core design principles that made constructivism so visually rigorous and impactful? What did it look like?
Constructivist graphic design emphasized rigorous structure. You see strong verticals separating blocks of text, horizontal bars emphasizing key quotations, often underlying grid systems organizing image placement. It created a very dynamic yet ordered aesthetic that felt both modern and purposeful.
Structure and energy.
Exactly. Another hugely influential Soviet artist was Vladimir Vasilyevich Lebedev. He embraced Bolshevism and designed these bold, flat, almost neo-primitivist agitprop posters for Rosta, the Soviet telegraph agency news posters displayed in windows. This work in turn prepared him to become the father of the 20th century Russian picture book. He learned to simplify forms down to their basic geometric shapes and use only brilliant primary colors, telling stories visually and sequentially. His graphic masterpieces like The Adventures of the Scarecrow or Circus embody this clarity and directness that was essential for widespread communication in a revolutionary society. They were designed to educate and inspire the new Soviet citizen.
And from the Netherlands, another abstract geometric movement emerged around the same time, one that sought universal harmony and a kind of blueprint for a new social order, influencing art and design profoundly.
This was De Stijl the Style, launched in 1917 by Theo van Doesburg, with the painter Piet Mondrian as its main philosophical wellspring. They sought universal laws of equilibrium and harmony for art, which they believed could serve as a prototype for a new, more rational social order.
Art as a model for society.
Precisely. Mondrian's paintings were central to this. He purged his art of all representational elements, moving beyond cubism towards pure geometric abstraction. He reduced everything to fundamental forms, horizontal and vertical lines, and primary colors: red, yellow, blue, plus black, white, and gray. He was aiming for a universal visual language of pure order and balance.
And how did these radical De Stijl principles translate directly into groundbreaking graphic design? What did a De Stijl poster or magazine cover look like?
In graphic design, De Stijl manifested as a purely abstract geometric style, primarily using those primary colors and emphasizing horizontal and vertical elements, stripped bare of any excess or ornament. Vilmos Huszar, for instance, applied these principles meticulously to the cover designs for the De Stijl magazine itself. He'd combined his abstract composition with the type and Van Doesburg's logo into this concise rectangle, often placed asymmetrically on the page, demonstrating a harmonious and ordered visual language that directly reflected their vision for a universal, rational aesthetic. Very distinct, very influential.
Perhaps the most famous and undeniably influential design school of the entire 20th century was the Bauhaus. It seems to have unified many of these modern ideas, championing that critical integration of art and technology.
The Bauhaus, yes. Founded by the architect Walter Gropius in Weimar, Germany in 1919. Initially, it drew inspiration from Expressionism, aiming to create a new spiritual society through the unity of artists and craftsmen. It was organized like a medieval Bauhut, a cathedral-building guild with a master, journeyman, and apprentice system. They saw the Gothic cathedral as the ultimate symbol of integrated arts.
Bringing art and craft together.
Exactly. When Paul Klee and Wassily Kandinsky, both prominent painters associated with Expressionism, joined the staff in the early 1920s, advanced ideas about abstract form, color theory, and space were integrated into the design vocabulary. The Bauhaus famously made no distinction between fine art and applied art, believing all forms of artistic expression were equally important and could contribute to building a better, more functional, more beautiful world through design.
And what revolutionary typographic ideas emerged from this crucible of modern design? How did they approach lettering and layout?
Walter Gropius and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy collaborated on the catalog for the big 1923 Bauhaus exhibition. The cover was actually designed by a talented student, Herbert Bayer, while Moholy-Nagy designed the interior. Moholy-Nagy contributed a really important statement to that catalog, describing typography as a tool of communication that must emphasize absolute clarity.
Clarity above all.
Above all.
Yeah.
He advocated that legibility should never be impaired by preconceived aesthetics, and letters should never be forced into a rigid framework just for looks. He believed in an uninhibited use of all linear directions, all typefaces, sizes, and colors, to create a new language of typography that was dynamic, expressive, and directly served the message. A real break from tradition.
And he truly pioneered a key concept that fused photography and typography into a single powerful message, didn't he? Type a photo.
Yes. Moholy-Nagy's passion for both typography and photography led him to coin the term type a photo. He defined this as the objective integration of word and image to communicate a message with immediacy. He called it the new visual literature.
Wow.
His 1923 pneumatic poster, Advertising Tires, is a prime example of an experimental type of photo. He used techniques like dramatic enlargement, distortion, dropouts, removing backgrounds, double exposures, and montage. He believed photography, with its objective presentation of facts, could free the viewer from relying on another person's subjective interpretation, like in an illustration, making communication more direct and impactful. A complete break from illustrative styles, embracing the machine aesthetic.
So the Bauhaus was this incredible hotbed of innovation, but like many avant-garde movements, it also faced significant political challenges, especially with the rise of the Nazis.
Indeed, the political climate in Germany became increasingly hostile. Walter Gropius resigned as director in 1928, and Bayer and Moholy-Nagy also left around that time. Jules Schmidt took over the typography and graphic design workshop, actually moving away slightly from strict constructivism towards more flexible approach. But the school, which had moved from Weimar to Dachau and then to Berlin, was ultimately forced to close in 1933 due to intense harassment from the Nazi regime, who saw its modernist ideals as degenerate art.
A huge loss.
Huge loss for Germany, but it led to this significant transatlantic exodus of faculty. Gropius, Moholy-Nagy, Bayer, Mies van der Rohe, Joseph Albers, many of them immigrated to America. Their presence profoundly influenced the course of American design education and practice after World War II, effectively transplanting the core ideas of European modernism and seeding new design programs at institutions like Harvard and the new Bauhaus in Chicago, later the Institute of Design.
Building directly on the Bauhaus's radical ideas, a new typography emerged that absolutely challenged conventional notions of beauty and legibility, prioritizing clarity and functional communication above absolutely everything else.
Jan Churchill, yeah. He was initially trained as a traditional calligrapher, but he was deeply impressed, almost converted, by the 1923 Bauhaus exhibition. He rapidly assimilated these new concepts and became a key practitioner and advocate of the new typography. In 1925, he designed a 24-page insert called Elementary Typography for a printing trade journal.
What was in it?
It explained and demonstrated asymmetrical typography using sans serif type, grids, rules, and photography. This was an absolute revelation to the German printing industry, which was still largely using centered layouts and traditional medieval-style typefaces. It generated immense enthusiasm almost overnight for this new, modern approach. It was like a manifesto.
What were the defining principles of this new typography that so powerfully rejected decoration in favor of function? What did it look like on the page?
Churchill's principles explicitly rejected decoration. He favored clarity over beauty, arguing that typographic form should be developed directly from the functions of the text itself, much like modernist architecture derived form from function.
Makes sense.
Key elements included dynamic, asymmetrical balance, no more centering everything. The exclusive use of sans serif type in various weights and proportions for its directness and clarity, an underlying horizontal and vertical structure, often an implicit grid, the innovative use of white space as an active structural component, not just empty background.
White space matters.
Hugely. Rules, bars, and boxes were often used for structure, balance, and emphasis. And photography was preferred for illustration because of its perceived precision and objectivity. Stijl believed that a kinetic, asymmetrical design of contrasting elements best expressed the new age of the machine. His prolific design practice books, job printing, ads, posters really set the standard for this new approach. Interestingly, later in his career, he somewhat renounced his early dogma and championed a revival of classical typography, especially in book design, showing his own evolution, but his early impact was indelible.
And beyond Stijl, other designers were pushing the boundaries of clarity and functional design in fascinating, parallel ways, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely. Otto Neurath, a Viennese scientist and mathematician, along with the woodcut artist Geert Arndt, developed Isotype, the international system of typographic picture education. This was a system that used elementary pictographs, simple icons, to present complex statistical data in a completely functional, undecorated, and universally understandable manner, making data accessible. Jan Stijl actually assisted them briefly.
Pictograms for data, we see that everywhere now.
Exactly. Another key innovator was Piet Zwart from the Netherlands, starting in the early 1920s. He rejected both traditional symmetrical layouts and the strict, rigid geometry of Stijl. Zwart playfully manipulated words, rules, and symbols on the page surface, creating what he called a field of tension, with rhythmic composition, vigorous contrasts of size and weight, and diagonal elements. You see this dynamically in his brilliant catalog designs for NKF, the Dutch cable manufacturer. Very energetic.
Sounds lively.
It was. And then there's Herbert Manner, a Swiss designer and photographer working in the 1930s. He studied under Fernand Léger in Paris and applied Modernism's approaches, collage, montage, extreme perspectives, to both photography and graphic design, especially in his stunning tourism posters for Switzerland. He integrated dynamic scale changes and striking typography seamlessly with photographic illustration to create the sense of awe and immediacy. Really pushed the boundaries of photo montage.
So what did all this ferment in European modernism mean for America? You mentioned the faculty exodus, but while Europe was pioneering these radical new ideas, the US was initially a bit slower to adopt them, particularly in commercial design, right?
That's generally right. The fabled 1913 Armory Show in New York introduced modern European art to America, but it mostly provoked public rejection and ridicule. It was seen as too radical, too abstract, crazy. Modernist European design didn't really become a significant influence in America until the 1930s. And even then, it initially gained ground more in high-end book and editorial design aimed at affluent, sophisticated audiences, rather than a widespread commercial advertising, which was still dominated by more traditional, illustrative, often sentimental styles.
But even so, some visionary American designers started to break new ground relatively early, translating these modernist principles into a uniquely American idiom, weren't they?
Definitely. Lester Beale, a largely self-taught graphic designer, was a key figure in the 1930s and 40s. He broke decisively with traditional American advertising layout, developing strong, direct visual forms. He clearly understood Stijl's new typography, and even seemed influenced by the Dada movement's random organization and intuitive placement of elements.
An American original.
Very much so. Beale often combined flat planes of bright color in elementary signs, like arrows, with photography, seeking visual contrast and high informational content. His posters for the Rural Electrification Administration, REA, a New Deal federal agency bringing power to rural areas, are iconic. They reduced pro-electrification messages to elemental signs, sometimes combining photo montage with the graphic power of the American flag stripes, creating a powerful, accessible, and uniquely American modernist voice.
And in the world of magazines, editorial design saw truly significant innovations during this period, transforming the visual experience for readers, particularly in high fashion and business publications.
Absolutely. Alexei Brodovich, a Russian immigrant who became art director for Harper's Bazaar from 1934 to 1958, was hugely influential. He had this amazing affinity for white space and sharp type on clear open pages. He aimed for a musical feeling in the flow of text and pictures across spreads.
Musical feeling?
Yeah, a sense of rhythm and harmony. He energized his layouts by commissioning art and photography from major European artists who were also immigrating or visiting, people like Henri Cartier-Bresson, Cassandra, Dali, Man Ray. He was a master of cropping, using extreme enlargement and creating dynamic juxtapositions of images. His work defined elegance and sophistication in magazine design, and he mentored generations of designers.
Real tastemaker.
Definitely. Another Russian immigrant, Alexander Lieberman, after working for Cassandra in Paris, became art director for Vogue in the US in 1943, and later editorial director of all Condé Nast publications. He enlivened Vogue with current images, modern typography, and sophisticated visual narratives. And Joseph Binder, an Austrian designer who came to the US in 1934, evolved from his early Cubist style towards a highly stylized realism. He often used airbrush to achieve these smooth, highly finished forms. His famous New York World's Fair poster from 1939 with the iconic trilon and perisphere structures really symbolized America's embrace of modernist design as he came of age on the international stage.
The Depression era also led to an interesting, maybe unexpected chapter in American design with significant government-funded art projects, didn't it? The WPA.
Yes. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, Federal Art Project, launched in 1935 during the Great Depression to provide work for artists, employed sculptors, painters, and unemployed illustrators and designers in its poster project division. This led to thousands of posters being produced across the country, promoting public health, safety, national parks, cultural events, and more.
What did they look like?
They often showed a strong aesthetic approach to typography, using it as both a dynamic compositional element and a powerful message communicator, frequently employing techniques like silk screen printing, which allowed for flat, bold colors, a unique moment where the government became a major patron of modern graphic design.
And then came World War II. How did design serve the war effort?
During WWII, graphic designers and fine artists created powerful communications for the Office of War Information, OWI, and other agencies. You had John Atherton's posters warning against careless talk with stark, almost surreal imagery. Joseph Binder's Army Air Corps poster was incredibly potent in its simplicity. Emmet Knight Coffer, the American working in Britain, designed Allied morale posters. And fine artists like Ben Shahn created deeply impactful designs conveying the brutality of the Nazis with raw emotional power. Even Herbert Bayer, the former Bauhaus master, his post-Bauhaus work became surprisingly illustrative during this period, combining simplified realism with clear hierarchy of information and strong underlying composition for various wartime communications and exhibitions. Design was absolutely mobilized.
Okay, so after World War II, America really seems to come into its own as a graphic design powerhouse, pioneering revolutionary new approaches in advertising and, crucially, in corporate identity. So what did this mean for how brands were built, perceived, and communicated visually? How did design shape the corporate landscape?
Well, this period saw the definitive rise of the art copy team model in advertising, where the visual designer and the writer worked synergistically, integrating words and images from the very beginning of the concept. Paul Rand was a major figure in this, working with the brilliant copywriter Bill Bernbach at the Weintraub Advertising Agency, even before Bernbach co-founded his own legendary agency.
Rand and Bernbach, a powerhouse team.
Absolutely. Their campaigns for clients like Orbach's department store used entertaining visual and verbal puns, wordplay, supported brilliantly by Rand's whimsical integration of photography, drawing, and the logo. The image visually reinforced the headline with intelligence and wit, rather than just illustrating it literally or shouting. It treated the audience as intelligent.
Paul Rand's influence on corporate identity design is just legendary. His logos for IBM, ABC, UPS, they're iconic. What made his approach so uniquely impactful and lasting?
So totally iconic. His 1946 book, Thoughts on Design, inspired a whole generation, laying out his principles of the interplay between form and function, the role of wit, simplicity, and visual integration. Later in his career, he focused extensively on trademark and corporate identity design, really defining the very idea of a comprehensive visual system for a corporation.
Take the IBM logo.
Right. He designed the original solid letterform logo in 1956, based on a typeface similar to Bettenbold condensed. Then, in the 1970s, he brilliantly updated it by introducing horizontal stripes, which subtly evoked the scan lines on video terminals, making the familiar mark feel more dynamic and technologically advanced without losing recognition.
Clever update.
And he even showed a willingness to playfully divert from the strict logo for conceptual posters, like his famous IBM Rebus poster from 1981, demonstrating how a strong identity could be both rigorously consistent and creatively flexible. It wasn't just about rigid rules. Elliot Noyes, who was IBM's consulting design director, fostered this approach, seeking consistency of design quality rather than a rigid stylistic theme, allowing flexibility and creativity from the designers working within the program.
A smart approach.
Rand also famously redesigned the ABC, American Broadcasting Company logo in 1965 into that simple, perfect circle, and the NXT computer logo for Steve Jobs in 1986. His annual reports for IBM, starting in the late 1950s, set the absolute standard for corporate literature, demonstrating how sophisticated design could elevate even seemingly routine documents into compelling communication pieces.
Beyond corporate branding, this post-war era also saw truly innovative approaches in magazine design and the burgeoning art of film titles, pushing visual communication in exciting new directions.
Oh, definitely. Alex Steinweiss, starting way back in 1940 at Columbia Records, basically invented the modern album cover. He applied modern design sensibilities using informal type placement, bold colors, and often abstract or symbolic imagery to visually express the music inside, creating a whole new genre of graphic design that was hugely influential.
From plain sleeves to art.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bradbury Thompson, one of the most influential graphic designers in post-war America, demonstrated this deep knowledge of printing and typesetting. His work for the paper company Westvaco, particularly the publication Westvaco Inspirations, which he designed from 1939 to 1961, expanded design possibilities. He used the typecase and the print shop as his canvas, experimenting with overlapping colors, typography, and exploring 18th and 19th century engravings as visual resources, recontextualizing historical elements for modern use in a really fresh way.
And Saul Bass, his film work is legendary.
Saul Bass, yes. Commissioned by director Otto Preminger for The Man with the Golden Arm in 1955, Bass created unified graphic materials for the entire film: the logo, posters, ads, and the groundbreaking animated title sequence. That stylized, jagged arm symbol became instantly iconic.
Define the film's look.
Totally. He pioneered this organic process in film titles where abstract forms appeared, disintegrated, reformed, and transformed in time and space, perfectly synchronized with the musical score. He became the acknowledged master of this new art form, setting the stage for how film titles would be conceived and designed for decades to come.
And this period also marked a significant maturation for American graphic design education, didn't it? With key university programs starting to shape future talent in a more formal way.
In 1950, Joseph Albers, the former Bauhaus master, became director of the art school at Yale University. He invited Alvin Eisenman to direct the graphic design program, creating the first such program supported by a major American university. They shared this passion for type and typography, emphasizing the study of letters as formal elements and grounding students in classical type design, instilling a rigorous foundation that influenced generations.
Important development.
Hugely. In magazine design, Otto Storch, who became art director for McCall starting in 1958, revolutionized the field. He completely unified typography with photography. Type wasn't just placed on the photo, it was designed to lock tightly into the image. Headlines became integral parts of illustrations. Type itself warped and bent, even taking on the shape of a mattress in one memorable spread, breaking the static grid and bringing incredible dynamism and visual wit to the page.
Sounds amazing.
Other innovators included Sipe Pinales, with her innovative covers for 17 and Charm, using bold stripe patterns and clever mirror image reflections. And Leo Leone, with his dynamic, often abstract cover designs for Fortune, bringing a playful modernism to the world of business publications.
And the advertising world itself underwent this dramatic revolution in the 50s and 60s, didn't it? Fundamentally changing how it spoke to consumers. The creative revolution.
The new advertising, spearheaded by Doyle Dane Bernbach, DDD, which opened in 1949. They famously aimed to remove the exclamation mark out of advertising. Instead of yelling, they talked intelligently to consumers, treating them as smart individuals rather than just targets for hype.
Respect for the audience.
Exactly. They used white space effectively to focus attention on a compelling headline and image, a stark contrast to the cluttered, loud layouts common at the time. Their legendary Think Small campaign for Volkswagen, with its iconic simple layout, minimalist photo, and self-deprecating headline, is a perfect example of their insightful, unpretentious approach that truly connected with people and broke through the noise.
And George Lois's Esquire covers? They were something else entirely.
George Lois, working for Esquire magazine in the 1960s, believed magazine covers shouldn't just be pretty pictures, they should be a statement, a spirited comment on the major articles inside. His over 90 Esquire covers, often collaborating with photographer Carl Fisher, were audacious, conceptually brilliant, and visually striking. They captured the essence of the turbulent times. Think Richard Nixon having makeup applied, Muhammad Ali pierced with arrows like Saint Sebastian.
Unforgettable images.
Absolutely unforgettable. They helped recapture the magazine's audience and return it to profitability through sheer visual audacity and cultural relevance. He connected directly with the times.
The push for consistent visual identity wasn't just happening in advertising agencies. Large, complex organizations started to truly understand the power of a unified corporate image, leading to the development of these groundbreaking, comprehensive design systems.
This is really where we see the maturation of corporate identity as a strategic discipline. CBS, under its president Frank Stanton, and longtime art director William Golden, who designed the iconic CBS I logo, became a pioneer. Their effectiveness wasn't based on rigid rules and a thick manual, but rather on the consistently high quality and intelligence of each individual design solution, guided by strong leadership.
Quality control.
Exactly. Lou Dorsman, who followed Golden and became art director for CBS Radio in 1946, eventually overseeing almost all of CBS's design, combined conceptual clarity with provocative visual presentation. He maintained a consistently high intelligent image for the corporation for 4 decades, always prioritizing communication effectiveness with imaginative problem solving. CBS became a model for consistent, high-quality corporate design managed with intelligence, not just rules.
But then came the idea of a more rigorously systematized design approach, championed by firms like Unimark, who really embraced the grid and standardization.
Right. Unimark International, founded in Chicago in 1965 by partners including Massimo Vignelli, explicitly rejected individualistic design approaches. They believed design could and should be a rational, objective system, almost a science. Their basic tool was the grid. They aimed to standardize all graphic communications for dozens of large corporate clients like Alcoa, Ford, JCPenney, Xerox.
What did that look like?
They often preferred Helvetica as the most neutral and legible typeface. They aimed for objectivity, clarity, and conformity across huge amounts of material, creating highly rational and rigorously systematized design programs that were virtually foolproof to implement, ensuring consistency on a massive scale.
From individual brilliance to system design.
A definite shift. This concept also extended to government initiatives. The Federal Design Improvement Program, launched by the National Endowment for the Arts in 1974, aimed to improve the quality and consistency of design across all U.S. government agencies. This led to unifying design systems, like the one for the National Park Service, the Unigrid system, designed by Massimo Vignelli at Vignelli Associates in 1977. It brought clarity and consistency to hundreds of park brochures and maps.
And the Olympic Games, with their immense global audience, multilingual needs, they became the ultimate showcase for these comprehensive design systems, didn't they? Pushing boundaries of scale and visual universality.
They were absolutely essential proving grounds. The 1968 Mexico City Olympiad, designed primarily by Lance Wyman, was a milestone. He created this incredible logotype that merged the Olympic rings, the year 68, and the word Mexico, using a repeated stripe pattern derived from traditional Mexican folk art and op art, a vibrant cultural fusion. And this wasn't just a logo. It was extended into a display typeface, a complete set of pictographic symbols for athletic and cultural events, signage, maps, stamps, uniforms, film titles, creating a truly unified visual identity that spoke vibrantly to a global audience.
A complete system.
Totally. Then, for the 1972 Munich Olympiad, Otto Acher directed a much more formal and rigorously systematized design program. The symbol was a radiant sunburst spiral. They used the Universe typeface exclusively, developed detailed publication grids, and used a restricted color palette, 2 blues, 2 greens, yellow, orange, 3 neutrals to ensure harmony in a festive yet organized atmosphere. They also developed incredibly sophisticated pictographs based on a modular grid, functioning as both signifiers and illustrations, easily understood across language barriers.
German precision.
You could say that. And for the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, the firm Sussman Treza & Co. had the challenge of using existing facilities scattered across the city. Their goal was to create a unified, celebratory, and international designed environment, primarily for the global television audience. They used bright colors, temporary structures, graphics, and signage, what they called a kit of parts, to transform disparate locations into a cohesive, festive experience, design knitting the city together for the world stage.
Beyond these huge corporate and systemic approaches, how did different nations and cultures with their unique histories and contexts express themselves through graphic design in the latter half of the 20th century? Was it all becoming homogenized?
Not at all. We see a true internationalization of graphic design practice, but often with very distinct local flavors and concerns. For instance, post-war Polish posters, often supported by government patronage but surprisingly free artistically, were incredible. Led by figures like Henryk Tomaszewski, they developed unique visual metaphors, often poetic, surreal, or darkly humorous, using bold, painterly graphics that stood in stark contrast to more direct commercial approaches elsewhere. They created a whole Polish poster school.
Right.
In contrast, the US poster craze of the 1960s was a totally grassroots affair, tied to social activism, civil rights, anti-war protests, and vibrant subcultures like psychedelic rock music in San Francisco. These posters were often pinned up on apartment walls as personal statements, reflecting a vivid counterculture rather than just being traditional advertisements. Very different context, very different look.
Let's look at some other distinct national voices. Germany, Cuba, for instance.
In Germany, after the war, you had designers like Gunther Kieser emerging, a brilliant imagist, known for inventing unexpected visual content by combining disparate images or ideas for new vitality. His Alabama Blues poster, for example, powerfully combined a dove, a photo of a civil rights demonstration, and roughwood type-inspired lettering to make a potent statement for jazz concerts. Poetic, but rational.
Strong imagery.
And Cuban posters, after the 1959 revolution, consciously avoided the heroic worker socialist realism common in the Soviet bloc. They assimilated influences from American pop art, psychedelia, pushpin studios, even Polish posters, creating a vibrant, eclectic style. And of course the image of Che Guevara, based on Alberto Cortez' photograph but graphically simplified by Jim Fitzpatrick, became this incredibly powerful global icon representing struggle against oppression, one of the most reproduced images of the late 20th century, demonstrating design's raw power in political movements.
And how did Japanese design manage to create such a unique and compelling blend of its deep traditional roots and international modernism?
They seem to have forged a really distinct path. Japanese design successfully maintained national traditions while incorporating international modernist influences, creating a really distinctive aesthetic, often characterized by subtlety, elegance, and a deep respect for materials and space. Ryuichi Yamashiro's famous tree planting poster, for example, beautifully united the spatial concerns and calligraphic sensibility of the East with Western communication concepts, creating a message that felt both universal and distinctly Japanese.
Balance.
Exactly. Hiko Tanaka masterfully used plane and shape, often employing grid structures, but filling them with vibrant color planes. He reinvented traditional Japanese motifs landscapes, theater masks, calligraphy in a modernist idiom. His Nihon Buyo poster, abstracting traditional Japanese dance figures into pure geometric forms, is a classic example.
Beautiful synthesis.
Then you have Tadanori Yoku, who completely exploded that sense of order. He replaced constructivist discipline with Dadaist vitality and collage, showing this fascination with mass media, pop culture, comic books, ukiyo-e prints. His graphics were uninhibited, often mystical, visually dense, reflecting a generation growing up with the complexities and contradictions of post-war American influence mixed with Japanese tradition, a kind of vibrant pop psychedelia.
And the Dutch design scene, building on its strong modernist legacy from De Stijl and designers like Piet Zwart, also developed a remarkably distinctive and often playful character, didn't it?
The Dutch, yes, building on that legacy of Nieuwe Kunst and early modernism, saw really diverse and often provocative approaches. You had Anton Beek, who participated in the Fluxus movement, kind of a neo-Dada thing. Peter Bertinga focused more on legibility, objectivity, classic modern aesthetics in his work for museums. Then you had Studio Dumbar in The Hague, founded by Gert Dumbar. They consciously rejected dogma, creating playful, sometimes anarchic designs, often using sculptural photography and mixed media. Their poster for a Mondrian collection, reinterpreting the artist's famous grid paintings in 3 dimensions with objects, is a great example of their wit.
Playful indeed.
And then there was Hardworking, initially a magazine, then a design collective in Rotterdam. They embraced a raw, unpolished, almost offensive aesthetic, rejecting boundaries between disciplines, embracing creative anarchy. They eventually merged into a more formal studio called Initio, and you also had groups like Wild Plakken. Wild pasting.
Wild pasting.
Yeah, they started by illegally pasting posters around Amsterdam for political and social causes they believed in. Later, they accepted commissions, but only if they agreed with the client's ideology, tackling issues like racism, the environment, women's rights, gay rights. They used design explicitly as a tool for social change, often with bold, confrontational graphics, a very engaged form of practice.
As the 20th century progressed, particularly from the 70s onward, we saw this distinct loosening of the rigid rules that had defined much of high modernism, especially in typography. This led to what some called new wave typography. What did this mean for how text was perceived, read, and even felt on the page?
Well, in the late 1960s and early 70s, Wolfgang Avant-garde, a German designer teaching in Basel, Switzerland, began to consciously question what he saw as the anemic phase of the international typographic style. He felt it had become too rigid, too formulaic, too impersonal.
Lost its spark.
Kind of. He rejected the right angle as the exclusive organizing principle. He started creating these joyous, intuitive designs with rich visual effects, layering type, using different weights and styles within words, playing with letter spacing, incorporating diagonal rules and halftone dots. His work was really about expanding the parameters of typographic communication, exploring readability and expression, not just establishing a new style for its own sake.
What did it look like specifically?
Key characteristics included letter space sans serif type, often quite tightly spaced, bold stair-step rules, ruled lines used almost graphically to energize the space, diagonal type, sudden italic or weight changes within words, type reversed out of solid bars. It created a dynamic, sometimes chaotic, yet often surprisingly legible visual experience, very textural.
And Weingart's radical approach had a significant and immediate impact on American designers, didn't it? When he started teaching and lecturing there.
Oh, hugely. Weingart's U.S. lecture tour in 1972 directly inspired a generation of young American designers, particularly those studying or teaching at places like Basel's counterpart programs in the U.S., or who saw his work published. People like Dan Friedman, April Greiman, and Willie Kuntz brought this new sensibility back to the U.S.
So what happened then?
This new wave typography led designers to really test the precepts of the international typographic style. They started incorporating Dadaist photo montage techniques again, deliberately violating grid structures, using purely functional elements like rules or dots decoratively, defining space as a field of tension, much like Pete Zwart had done half a century earlier. Intuition, play, and personal expression re-entered the design process in a big way. Kenneth Hybert, for instance, combined rigorous grid systems with unexpected textures, dot patterns, and wider typefaces, playfully shifting forms within that structure.
A bit more personality.
Definitely. And in the early 1980s, you saw the emergence of San Francisco postmodern design. Figures like Michael Vanderbilt, Michael Manwaring, Michael Cronin, their work often had this cheerful optimism, warm humor, and an unbridled, almost exuberant attitude about form and space, celebrating individuality and consciously breaking from the perceived rigidity of corporate modernism. Lots of pastels, geometric shapes, playful arrangements.
And speaking of playful, retro and vernacular design emerged around the same time. Movements that looked back to earlier eras, but reinterpreted them with a fresh, often irreverent, and always surprising eye.
This movement, especially strong in the 1980s, showed a growing historical consciousness among designers, but often filtered through a kind of pop culture or nostalgic lens. Retro involved this uninhibited, eclectic interest in modernist European design from the first half of the century. Think constructivism, Stijl, Bauhaus, but often disregarding the proper rules of typography associated with them. And there was this fascination with eccentric, decorative typefaces from the 1920s and 30s.
Okay, and vernacular.
Vernacular design involved paraphrasing or directly borrowing from commonplace, everyday graphic forms from the past. Things like old baseball cards, matchbook covers, hardware store signs, rubber stamps, technical diagrams, elevating these low or non-designed aesthetics into the realm of high design, often with wit and irony.
And Paula Scher's work is a fantastic example of this whole retro-vernacular fusion, isn't it? Her bold reinterpretations are instantly recognizable.
Paula Scher in New York, absolutely. She became a master of this, synthesizing seemingly contradictory sources like Russian constructivism and dense 19th century wood-type posters. She wasn't just copying, she was reinventing and combining these vocabularies of forms. She replaced the floating weightlessness often associated with constructivism with this dense packing of forms, giving her work the visual weight and vigor of old wood-type posters, but with modern wit.
Very energetic.
Hugely energetic. She even designed complete digital fonts based on eccentric 1920s and 30s typefaces that had vanished when metal type disappeared, bringing them back into circulation. Her famous Swatch poster from 1985 unabashedly parodied Herbert Matter's classic 1930s Swiss tourism poster, playfully acknowledging its historical reference while selling a contemporary product.
Cute.
Totally. And in the UK, Neville Brody, who famously stated he never learned the rules of correct typography, felt he had the freedom to invent his own. Designing for style magazines like The Face and Arena, he created geometric sans serif typefaces and treated headlines as powerful graphic objects, not just words. He viewed the magazine itself as a multidimensional object, deconstructing elements, layering meanings, sometimes over multiple issues, like famously turning Madonna's M into a W for an Andy Warhol interview spread, playing with context and identity.
What was the overall spirit here?
The spirit was one of liberation, intuition, going against the grain of dominant corporate modern design. It was about incorporating vernacular and historic forms, experimenting with highly personal, even eccentric ideas. Paul Assure's later work, for instance, involving huge hand-painted typographic maps, became this beautiful counterpoint to purely computer-aided design, showing that the handmade could be embraced as part of a forward-looking practice, blending craft and concept. #7. The digital revolution and beyond.
Okay, now we arrive at what is arguably the most recent and certainly one of the most profound transformations in graphic design: the digital revolution. What did this mean? How did computers change everything for how designers worked and how we, as consumers, accessed and interacted with visual information?
Well, the last quarter of the 20th century saw just extraordinary advances in electronic and computer technology that irrevocably changed graphic design, production, everything. Remember how the Industrial Revolution had fragmented the process of creating and printing graphics into all those specialized steps: designers, typesetters, production artists, camera operators, strippers, plate makers?
Right, the assembly line.
Exactly.
Right.
By the 1990s, digital technology enabled one person operating a desktop computer to potentially control most or even all of these functions. From page layout and typography to image manipulation, color separation, even outputting files directly for plate making or digital printing, this consolidation was truly revolutionary. It put immense creative power and production control into the hands of individual designers, collapsing that complex multi-step workflow into a single machine.
And the Apple Macintosh specifically seems to have been the pivotal catalyst for this revolution, didn't it? Why was it so important?
It really was. Apple Computer's introduction of the first-generation Macintosh back in 1984 foretold this graphic revolution. It displayed bitmapped graphics, meaning its screen presented information as a grid of dots, or pixels, at 72 dots per inch, which allowed for reasonable visual fidelity. What you see is what you get. WYSIDIYG.
Okay.
Crucially, its graphical user interface, GUI, with the mouse and those friendly on-screen icons designed by Susan Kare, allowed for intuitive control. Users could focus on creative work rather than memorizing complex commands or programming. It felt accessible.
User-friendly.
Exactly. This was paired relatively quickly with powerful software like Aldus PageMaker, then Quark Express, which enabled designers to place text and images with unprecedented precision, control typography down to tiny fractions, and Adobe Photoshop, which allowed for previously unimaginable levels of image manipulation and creation. It blurred the lines between photography and illustration and opened up a universe of visual possibilities right there on the desktop.
This newfound digital freedom must have unleashed a torrent of experimental editorial design, challenging pretty much every old convention in the book.
Oh, absolutely. David Carson, who famously came to design after being a professional surfer and school teacher, really exemplified this radical shift in the late 80s and early 90s. Working on magazines like Beach Culture and then Ray Gun, he famously eschewed grids, traditional information hierarchy, even consistent layouts from page to page.
What did he do instead?
He explored the expressive possibilities for each specific article, each subject, each page. He rejected conventional notions of typographic syntax and legibility, sometimes pushing type to the edge of unreadability to express the energy of the music or culture he was covering. He often made readers actively decipher his messages through erratic letter spacing, slicing away parts of letters, using extreme force justification, setting text in curved or irregular shapes, often with minimal contrast between type and complex background images.
Controversial.
Hugely controversial, but undeniably influential. His designs were this direct, visceral response to the content, daring the reader to engage, almost forcing a new kind of interaction with the printed page. And designers like Fred Woodward at Rolling Stone also embraced digital manipulation, but often sought a more handmade, layered look. He used a huge range of fonts, incorporated calligraphy and hand lettering, and even embraced what he called graphic entropy.
Graphic entropy.
Yeah, deliberately introducing imperfections and visual noise by running type through a photocopier multiple times, degrading it, creating this raw, distorted, almost chaotic effect that paradoxically mimicked a handmade feel, even though it was digitally composed. He famously preferred never to use the same typeface twice in the magazine, constantly reinventing the design in response to the content, aiming for a unique, fresh feel with every single issue. Very dynamic.
The digital revolution also completely democratized type design itself, didn't it? Yeah. Leading to this explosion of new fonts, but also inevitably raising some fascinating questions about quality, consistency, maybe even authorship.
Indeed. Digital technology, particularly font creation software like Fontographer that ran on the Mac, allowed for the relatively inexpensive creation of digital fonts. Anyone could potentially become a type designer. This led to a proliferation of new typeface designs rivaling the explosion back in the Victorian era.
Good and bad.
Both. You had established companies like Adobe releasing excellent digital revivals of classical typefaces, Adobe Garamond, Minion by Robert Slimbach, and superb new designs like Lithos and Trajan by Carol Twombly, all crafted with precision for the digital realm. But you also had thousands of new, often amateur or experimental fonts flooding the market from cottage industry type foundries or even individuals. This democratization was profound, making type design accessible, but it also meant quality varied wildly, and issues like piracy became rampant.
And beyond just the sheer quantity, what about truly groundbreaking innovations in typeface design that were only really possible in this new digital context? Things you couldn't do with metal.
Matthew Carter's Walker typeface, designed in 1995 for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, provides a stunning example of expanding typographic possibilities inherent in digital technology. It features sturdy sans serif capitals, but comes with 5 unique snap-on serifs that could be attached electronically, at will, to the vertical strokes of each letter. It's available in various widths, too.
Like Lego for letters.
Kind of. Carter also designed a series of ruled lines interruptions that could run over, under, or both under and over the letters, linking their forms into this dynamic unity. The typeface itself, through all its possible permutations and combinations, effectively becomes the flexible corporate identity system for the Walker. It allows them to modulate the typographic forms to suit the specific message or context at hand. This demonstrated a new level of built-in flexibility and customization in typography, moving beyond the fixed forms of the industrial era into an age of dynamic, responsive expression.
And of course, digital imaging profoundly changed photography itself, completely blurring those lines between what was once relatively distinct: photography, illustration, fine art.
The photograph truly lost its undisputed status as an objective document of visual reality, because electronic software like Photoshop allowed for seamless, often undetectable image manipulation. What you saw was no longer necessarily what was captured directly through a lens. It could be a composite, retouched, completely fabricated.
The end of truth in photos.
Well, it certainly complicated it. The boundaries between the roles of designer, illustrator, and photographer began to crumble, as one person could now perform tasks: image creation, manipulation, integration with type that once required multiple specialists with distinct skills and equipment. While early image manipulation systems were incredibly costly and complex, the Macintosh and affordable software democratized access, leading to this widespread creative potential and potential for misuse for anyone with a computer. We also saw early interactive digital design emerge, like on CD-ROMs. Meta designed San Francisco's Visibility, designed with Eric Speckerman, taught visual perception concepts using metaphors like unfolded cubes and interactive elements, showcasing how digital design could engage users in entirely new, immersive ways beyond the static printed page.
And finally, the internet. It utterly transformed how we access information, interact with each other, conduct commerce, opening up entirely new horizons and challenges for graphic design. From personal websites to global corporations, it created a truly interconnected visual world.
The information superhighway, as it was called in the 1990s, represented an unprecedented advance in communication, leading to a previously inconceivable decentralization of media. Information was no longer centrally controlled by big publishers or broadcasters. It was potentially accessible to and publishable by anyone with connection.
Chaos ensues.
Well, early web design certainly faced significant constraints. Tiny screen sizes with low resolution, limited bandwidth meaning slow downloads, very limited font choices relying on the user's system defaults. This led to understandable fears among established designers of collapsing design standards, as the visual quality of many early websites was, frankly, rudimentary, often defaulting to Times Roman or Arial.
The Wild West.
Pretty much. But pioneers quickly emerged. Designers like Jessica Helfand, who designed the initial Discovery Channel website, demonstrated how graphic designers could effectively create identity, aid navigation through clear structure, and bring visual interest and sophistication to websites, even within those constraints. She used geometric zoning and images as clear signifiers to help users navigate complex information intuitively. Clement Mock, with his innovative IQVC shopping site, and Bob Awfuldish with his Font Boy interactive font catalog online, also pushed the boundaries of what was possible in this nascent medium, laying the groundwork for the rich, interactive, and visually diverse web experiences we take for granted today.
As we look at contemporary graphic design today, wrapping things up, we see this truly fascinating blend of global influences, ancient cultural traditions being reinterpreted, and cutting-edge new technologies, all combining to express complex ideas with incredibly unique visual voices from all over the world.
Absolutely. Designers worldwide are skillfully combining advanced digital technology with deep dives into their own traditional culture and keen observations of contemporary vernacular forms, the stuff you see on the street, for example.
Interesting examples.
Okay, Lukova, a Bulgarian designer working in the US since 1981. She uses these radically contrasting, often simple images to confront social and political issues, war, poverty, the environment. Her work is incredibly powerful, winning awards like the world's most memorable poster at the International Poster Biennial in Mexico. Stark, symbolic, universal. In Germany, you have designers like Rudi Meyer creating highly imaginative opera posters, often using undulating type flowing like the Italian flag colors, or making the letter A in Ida look like a decapitated head, visual puns with depth. Niklaus Troxler in Switzerland designs incredible jazz posters, sometimes purely typographic, implying the music or the musician through absence or dynamic composition. Uwe Losch mingles flies with typography for an exhibition poster. Holger Matthews uses witty photographic manipulations, like making sunglasses out of tomatoes for summer events posters. Playful but smart.
And powerful voices emerging from other parts of the world, too, bringing different perspectives.
Yes, definitely. Reza Abedini from Iran creates stunning posters and book designs combining elegant Farsi calligraphy with English or French type. For him, type and image often become one fluid entity radiating this graceful elegance that bridges ancient traditions with modern aesthetics.
Beautiful blend.
In America, Chip Kidd, the renowned book jacket designer for Alfred A. Knopf, creates highly conceptual covers. He often uses vintage images, found objects, and visual puns, asking readers to actively bridge the gap between what they read and what they see, making the cover an integral, often witty, part of the reading experience itself.
Engaging the reader visually.
Exactly. And Chasmavian Davies, originally from Zimbabwe but working internationally, strongly believes design is a powerful tool for social change. His human rights poster series, eventually adopted by the UN, came directly from his political convictions about the loss of freedom under Robert Mugabe's government in Zimbabwe. It shows how graphic design can be a potent, essential voice for activism and human rights advocacy. Mexican designers too, like Alejandro Magallanes or Germán Montalvo, often educated partly in Europe, fuse European modernism with a distinctly Mexican sensibility and sharp social commentary, resulting in direct, sometimes confrontational designs that address local issues with global design sophistication. It's truly a vibrant global tapestry of visual expression, constantly evolving and reflecting the complex world around us. Hashtag outro. So what does this all mean for us looking back? We've seen how graphic design has always been at the forefront of shaping human communication. From the very first written marks carved in stone right up to the complex digital interfaces you interact with constantly today on your phone or computer. It's a field that's constantly pushing boundaries, reflecting society, and sometimes even actively shaping it in profound ways.
Yeah, from the meticulous patient work of those medieval scribes to the bold, radical experiments of the Bauhaus, and now to the intricate, instantaneous digital creations of our present day. It's really a testament to human ingenuity in our endless, fundamental drive to communicate, to share ideas visually. So the next time you see a logo, a poster, an app interface, or even just the layout of a web page, hopefully you'll recognize not just the immediate message, but the incredible millennia-long visual journey it's been on to get to you.
Which raises, I think, an important question for you, the listener, to consider. As technology continues to evolve at this unprecedented, almost dizzying pace, and as more and more people gain access to sophisticated design tools, how will the very definition of graphic design itself continue to change? What new forms of visual communication do you anticipate seeing emerge in your lifetime, and how do you think they'll shape our world next?
That's all for this deep dive into the epic history of graphic design. Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating visual journey.